Some generals are remembered for the ground they conquered. Walter Model is remembered for the ground he refused to surrender. When the Third Reich began to collapse under the weight of the war it had started, when supply lines shriveled and armies broke, when officers begged for retreat, Walter Model stood firm, not with ideology, not with fanaticism, but with a ruthless, calculated instinct to make the enemy bleed for every inch. He was not elegant like Manstein, not theatrical like Patton, not visionary like Guderian. Model was something else entirely, the fire extinguisher of the German army. Whenever a front was collapsing, whenever chaos became unstoppable, whenever the Wehrmacht was ready to dissolve into panic, one name appeared on the telegram: Model. And he went, without hesitation, without complaint. He walked into disasters and built walls out of what remained, broken divisions, scattered regiments, men held together by exhaustion and willpower. If Germany had a general who could wrestle defeat into a temporary stalemate, it was Walter Model. He came from simple roots, not aristocracy, not privilege, not influence. He was the son of a music teacher who clawed his way upward through sheer ability and iron discipline. In an army dominated by old Prussian families, Model was the outsider, the self-made warrior who pushed his way into the general staff through talent rather than pedigree. He was direct, blunt, unpolished. He swore, he shouted, he demanded impossible results, and somehow delivered them. To Model, war was not romantic. It was mechanical, brutal, a problem to be solved. And he did not solve problems with speeches, he solved them with movement, with trenches, with artillery, with blood. On the Eastern Front, where entire armies vanished beneath snow, where villages burned to ash, and where humanity fell apart in the cold, Model crafted defences that turned chaos into structure. When Soviet offensives smashed through German positions, Model countered not with flashy manoeuvres, but with raw endurance. He built defensive belts, layered positions, fallback lines. He delayed the Soviet advance, not for hours, but for months. His soldiers called him the Lion of the Eastern Front. His enemies called him the Führer's firefighter. Wherever the flames were hottest, he appeared. But Model's relationship with Hitler was uniquely dangerous. Hitler loved Model because Model never came to beg, he came to fix. And yet, unlike other field marshals, Model was not a blind servant of ideology. He contradicted Hitler. He argued. He defied. He sent Hitler's unrealistic orders back with harsh notes scrawled across them. Sometimes he ignored orders entirely to save lives. Model's genius was simple. He did not try to win battles that were already lost. He tried to make sure his soldiers survived them. Still, he served a regime that did not deserve him. When Model was transferred to the Western Front, in 1944, after the disaster of Normandy, the German front was collapsing like a sandcastle against the incoming tide of Allied power. Roads were flooded with retreat, units shattered, communications burned, supply lines broken. Model arrived and began doing what he always did, pulling scattered troops into fighting groups, organising them into defensive zones, buying time through grit and violence. Patton later admitted that Model was the only German commander he truly feared. Eisenhower called Model the most aggressive defensive commander the Allies had ever faced. Then came the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler wanted a glorious offensive. Model wanted to live in reality. He knew the plan was hopeless, fuel was insufficient, and the idea of reaching Antwerp was delusion. But Hitler demanded the attack. So Model executed it, not because he believed in victory, but because duty drove him forward. When the offensive failed, Model switched back to defence, slowing the Allied advance and saving what remained of his army from annihilation. In the war's final months, when the Reich was choking on its own destruction, when bombs turned German cities into rubble, when the Soviet army closed in on the Ruhr pocket, Model made his final decision. Hitler ordered him to fight until the last man. Model refused. He would not sacrifice his soldiers to satisfy Hitler's fantasy. He disbanded his army, allowing tens of thousands of men to surrender instead of die in a pointless last stand. Then he walked alone into a forest and took his own life. Walter Model chose death not out of cowardice, but out of responsibility. He believed that a commander must answer for his army, and he refused to face the trials that were sure to follow. He had spent the war preventing collapses. In the end, He could not prevent his own. Walter Model was not a hero. He was not a villain. He was a paradox, perhaps the most brutally efficient defensive commander of the war, whose genius was spent delaying the inevitable for a regime unworthy of his skill. Tonight, we return to the frozen roads, the collapsing fronts, the desperate counterattacks, to the moment when war demanded not ambition but survival. This is the entire history of Walter Model, Germany's defensive genius, the firefighter of failing fronts, and the man who learned that sometimes the hardest battle is refusing to let others die for pride. Before we begin, take a moment, look around you. Where are you right now? Are you listening from a quiet bedroom with the lights low, or sitting at your desk while the world outside moves on without noticing? What time is it for you, late at night, early morning, or somewhere in between? I like imagining that moment, one human being, somewhere far away, choosing to spend this moment in history with me. And if these slow, thoughtful journeys into the past help you unwind, reflect, or drift into sleep, consider subscribing. It tells me that someone values stories told with patience and depth, and it keeps me inspired to continue creating them. January 1942. The Eastern Front, somewhere in the frozen wasteland west of Moscow. A staff car pulls up to the headquarters of the German 9th Army, its exhaust forming white clouds in the -30-degree air. The officers waiting outside expect the usual: another Prussian aristocrat, another general with a von before his name, another commander who hunts and rides and comes from a family that's been producing officers since Frederick the Great. Instead, out steps a short, thin man with a monocle, carrying not a riding crop but a leather case full of technical manuals and maps. He doesn't swagger. He walks like an accountant arriving at an audit. The watching officers exchange confused glances. This is Walter Model, and he looks nothing like their idea of a German general. Model's first actions confirm his strangeness. Within an hour of arrival, he's grilling his corps, commanders not about glory or honour, but about ammunition stocks, supply routes, and the precise locations of defensive positions. He wants numbers. How many shells per gun per day? What's the maximum range of our anti-tank weapons? Where are the natural choke points in our sector? His questions come rapid fire, delivered in a clipped, professorial tone. Officers who've served under aristocratic commanders for years find themselves suddenly scrambling for data they never bothered to memorize. One Panzer general later recalled, "He asked me 17 specific questions about my division's readiness. I could answer 3. He looked at me like I was a student who hadn't done his homework. I was a lieutenant general, and I felt like a cadet." Model isn't trying to humiliate anyone. He simply cannot understand leading men into battle without knowing every logistical detail. To him, war is mathematics, and he's checking the equation. That night, while other generals relax in their quarters, Model sits alone under lamplight, his monocle catching the flicker of the kerosene lamp. He's writing, not a letter home, not a personal diary, but a 47-page tactical analysis of the 9th Army's defensive sector. He diagrams fields of fire. He calculates how many troops would be needed to hold each kilometre of front. He identifies weak points in Soviet positions and weak points in his own. By morning, he's produced a document so detailed that his staff officers will spend 3 days just processing his recommendations. One aide peers over the general's shoulder as dawn breaks and sees pages covered in neat handwriting, sketches of defensive positions, mathematical calculations in the margins. The general didn't sleep. He whispers to another officer. "I don't think he ever sleeps," comes the reply. They're both impressed and unsettled. This is not how German generals are supposed to behave. Model's oddness has deep roots. Born in 1891 in Genthin, a small town in Brandenburg, he is the son of a music teacher. Not a landowner, not a military family, a music teacher. In the Prussian officer corps, this makes him practically a commoner. When young Walter arrives at military academy in 1910, he enters a world dominated by boys whose families have owned estates for centuries. They have von before their names. They speak of hunting lodges and family regiments. Walter Model has none of this. He has something else, a relentless work ethic, and a mind that treats military science like engineering. While his classmates party, he studies. While they learn to dance, He learns to calculate artillery trajectories. They mock him behind his back. The professor, they call him the music teacher's boy. He doesn't care. He graduates near the top of his class through pure competence. And competence, he's learning, is a weapon the aristocrats don't have a monopoly on. His rise through the ranks follows an unconventional path. Model never serves in a glamorous cavalry regiment or an elite guard unit. Instead, he moves through staff positions, technical assignments, logistical commands. He becomes an expert in railway transport, in fortification design, in the unglamorous machinery that makes armies function. During the First World War, he serves mostly in staff roles, planning operations rather than leading charges. His superiors notice something. His operations work. His supply calculations prove accurate. His defensive plans hold. He's not inspiring, he's not charismatic, but he's reliable in a way that aristocratic flair can never be. By 1942, he's a lieutenant general. And he's gotten there not because of his family name, but because armies that want to win need men who understand how war actually functions. The aristocrats still look down on him, but increasingly, they also need him. At the 9th Army headquarters, Model's officers quickly learn his peculiar style. He's everywhere. Officers accustomed to generals who command from the rear find Model constantly at the front, often under fire, examining positions personally. Der Frontschwein. The soldiers start calling him the front pig, the man who's always in the mud with them. It's a nickname of grudging respect. He doesn't drink with the officers. He doesn't hunt. He doesn't engage in the social rituals that lubricate the Wehrmacht's aristocratic culture. Instead, he works. And he demands that everyone around him work with the same intensity. A young lieutenant describes his first encounter. The general appeared at our position without warning. Shells were landing 200 meters away. He didn't flinch. He walked along our trench, adjusted our machine gun positions with his hands, pointed out a better angle for our anti-tank gun. Then he was gone. We never saw our previous commander leave his command post. This one acts like he's inspecting a factory floor. Except the factory is trying to kill him. The contrast with Germany's traditional military elite grows more apparent daily. Consider the typical German general in 1942. He's likely from an old military family, probably has a von in his name, attended elite schools, speaks French, hunts on his family estate. He commands with personal authority, expects obedience based on his social position, and views military service as a calling of his class. Now consider Model. Middle-class background. No von, doesn't hunt, doesn't ride horses for pleasure, doesn't command through aristocratic prestige but through technical expertise. When he issues orders, they come with detailed explanations, with maps, with calculations. He treats his officers like junior engineers on a project, not like vassals serving a lord. The old guard finds this vulgar. The younger officers find it refreshing. And the soldiers in the trenches? They're just starting to notice that this strange little man with the monocle seems to understand that keeping them alive requires more than courage. It requires planning. Statistics tell part of Model's story. In 1942, approximately 73% of Wehrmacht generals come from aristocratic families, the traditional von nobility that has dominated Prussian military culture for 2 centuries. Model is part of the 27% who are not. But here's what makes him unusual. He doesn't pretend to be something he's not. Other middle-class officers who rise through the ranks often adopt aristocratic manners, acquire estates, marry into nobility. Model does none of this. He remains the music teacher's son who treats war like a technical problem. His contemporaries like von Manstein and von Rundstedt command armies with aristocratic flair, making bold strategic gambles, emphasizing operational art and military genius. Model commands armies like an engineer building a bridge, emphasizing logistics, defensive positions, ammunition, calculations. Both approaches can win battles. But as Germany's situation deteriorates, as resources shrink and grand offensives become impossible, the aristocrats' approach will fail, while the engineer's approach might, just might, keep armies functioning. His relationship with National Socialism adds another layer to his profile. Model joined the Nazi Party in 1933, earlier than most professional officers, who viewed the party with aristocratic disdain. Why did he join? Not, it seems, from ideological fervour, but from pragmatic calculation. He recognised that the new regime would favour officers who showed political loyalty, where aristocratic generals maintained aloof distance from the party. Model embraced it, at least publicly. He understood something his aristocratic peers didn't quite grasp. In the new Germany, competence plus political reliability would beat aristocratic birth. It's a calculation that will later prove tragically correct. Hitler will trust Model in ways he never trusts the aristocrats, and that trust will allow Model to save hundreds of thousands of German soldiers through flexible defence. But it will also make him complicit in prolonging a criminal regime. In January 1942, those consequences lie years in the future. For now, Model is simply the odd new commander who doesn't act like a proper general, who carries technical manuals instead of swagger, who calculates instead of postures. As his first weeks at 9th Army progress, officers begin whispering a question that will follow Model throughout his career. What makes this man different? It's not courage. Plenty of German generals are brave. It's not tactical skill. Many commanders understand battlefield tactics. It's not even ruthlessness. The Wehrmacht has no shortage of hard men. What makes Model different is his fundamental worldview. He sees war not as an art, not as a test of will, not as a stage for heroism, but as an engineering problem with human variables. Every battlefield is a system. Every defensive line is an equation. Every retreat is a calculation. Keep casualties below a certain ratio, preserve combat power above a certain threshold, maintain supply lines within certain parameters, solve the equation, and you survive to fight tomorrow. It's a bloodless way to think about blood-soaked ground. But as Germany's strategic situation deteriorates, as the Wehrmacht shifts from offence to defence, as survival matters more than glory, this engineering approach will prove its worth. The aristocrats will devise brilliant strategies that require resources Germany no longer has. The professor will devise adequate strategies that work with what's actually available. History will remember the aristocrats' names and study Model's methods. That gap between fame and effectiveness will define his entire career. In January 1942, at a frozen headquarters on the Eastern Front, that career is just beginning to reveal its strange shape. The officers watching him work don't yet understand what they're seeing. They will. January 1942, 30 kilometers west of Moscow. Lieutenant General Walter Model stands on a snow-covered hilltop, surveying what will become his reputation's foundation. Before him stretches the Rzhev salient, a massive German-held bulge, jutting 160 kilometers wide and 200 kilometers deep into Soviet territory. Any competent staff officer can see the problem immediately. It's a nightmare to defend, exposed on three sides, requiring enormous troop concentrations just to maintain the perimeter. The previous commander saw it as a liability. Model sees it as an opportunity, not to attack, which is what Hitler wants, but to create the perfect killing ground. He turns to his chief of staff and says something that will define his entire approach to warfare. The Soviets will attack here, again and again. Let them. We'll turn their numerical advantage into corpses. His staff officer looks shocked. Model doesn't notice or doesn't care. He's already sketching defensive lines in his notebook, his mind calculating fields of fire, calculating casualty ratios, calculating how many Soviet soldiers will die trying to eliminate this salient. Model's defensive concept revolutionizes how the Wehrmacht thinks about holding ground. Traditional German doctrine in 1942 still emphasizes the static defensive line, the continuous front where every meter gets defended with equal intensity. Model immediately abandons this approach. Instead, he creates defense in depth, 3 to 5 defensive lines, each 2 to 3 kilometers apart. The forward line is lightly held, designed to break under attack. The second line is stronger, but still not the main position. The third line, often 4 to 6 kilometers behind the front, contains the real defensive strength, dug-in infantry, pre-sighted artillery, carefully prepared killing zones. Soviet attacks, if they're lucky, overrun the first line easily. They advance, thinking they're succeeding, then they hit the second line, which slows them, funnels them into specific corridors. Then they hit the third line, where pre-registered German artillery turns their formations into smoking wreckage. A staff officer questions this approach. General, we're giving up ground without fighting. Model's response becomes legendary in Wehrmacht tactical circles. I'm not giving up ground. I'm trading worthless space for Soviet blood. Then I'll take the space back with counterattacks. February 1942. The system gets its first test. Soviet forces launch Operation Sychevka-Vyazma offensive, throwing multiple armies at the Rzhev salient. Marshal Georgy Zhukov commands the operation, Stalin's best general leading an offensive designed to encircle and destroy Model's Ninth Army. Initial attacks smash through the German forward positions exactly as Model predicted. Soviet rifle divisions advance 3, 4, 5 kilometers in the first day. Moscow receives triumphant reports. The German line is breaking. In reality, Model's defense is working perfectly. Soviet units advancing into the salient find themselves in pre-planned killing zones. German artillery, positioned weeks earlier with precisely calculated firing coordinates, opens up. The Soviets are attacking where Model wants them to attack, advancing along routes Model selected for them, concentrating in areas where every German gun can reach them. A Soviet battalion commander, later captured, describes the experience. We thought we were winning. We'd broken the German line. We advanced 10 kilometers in 2 days. Then the artillery started. It came from 3 sides. The Germans knew exactly where we'd be. It was like walking into a trap that we couldn't see until it closed. The scale of killing becomes almost industrial. Model has organized his artillery in what his staff calls the Model Grid, a system where every square kilometer of likely Soviet attack routes has pre-registered firing coordinates. Artillery crews don't need to adjust fire or locate targets. They simply receive coordinates, a number-letter combination, and fire. Shells begin landing within 90 seconds. This system requires enormous preparation, days of surveying, weeks of calculating, mountains of paperwork. It's the kind of unglamorous technical work that aristocratic generals delegate to staff officers and then ignore. Model personally oversees its creation, checking calculations, visiting every artillery position, ensuring the system works. When Soviet attacks come, German gunners simply work down lists. Coordinate set Alpha 7, 10 rounds, fire. Alpha 8, 15 rounds, fire. The Soviets advance into mathematical death zones where German technical superiority in artillery finds its perfect expression. Model stands at his command post, receiving reports, occasionally adjusting the system, mostly just watching his equation solve itself in blood and snow. But Model's innovation extends beyond artillery. He invents what he calls wandering pockets, mobile reserves, positioned 5 to 10 kilometers behind the lines. When Soviet forces break through, which they do regularly in the chaotic fighting, these reserves immediately counterattack. Crucially, they don't try to restore the original line. Instead, they hit the Soviet penetration from the flanks, inflict heavy casualties, then withdraw before Soviet reinforcements arrive. Hours or days later, they attack again from a different direction. Soviet commanders find themselves fighting an enemy they can't pin down. They take a village, German forces counterattack from the west. They prepare defences facing west, Germans attack from the north. The wandering pockets never stay in one place long enough to be destroyed, but they appear everywhere, disrupting Soviet offensives, killing logistics troops, forcing Soviet commanders to divert forces from offensive operations to defensive security. A German captain explains the tactic to his battalion. We're not defending territory, we're defending by attacking. Never stay still long enough for their artillery to find you. Hit them, hurt them, disappear. Through spring and summer of 1942, the Rzhev meat grinder operates continuously. Soviet offensives come in waves. February, March, July, August, November. Each follows the same pattern. Massive Soviet numerical superiority, 3-1. 4-1, sometimes 5-1 advantage in troops and tanks. Initial Soviet successes, forward German positions overrun. Then the killing begins. Soviet forces bogged down in Model's defensive system, taking staggering casualties. German counterattacks restore much of the lost ground, the line stabilizes roughly where it started, and the casualties mount. Soviet forces attacking the Rzhev salient suffer catastrophic losses, approximately 2 million casualties over 14 months of operations. German losses are substantial but proportionally much smaller, roughly 500,000 casualties. The math is brutal but clear. For every German soldier killed or wounded, 4 Soviet soldiers become casualties. Model's engineering approach to defense is working. The Rzhev salient isn't collapsing. Instead, it's consuming entire Soviet armies, bleeding the Red Army white in exchange for territory that neither side ultimately needs. Model's personal leadership style reinforces his tactical system. He's constantly at the front, personally visiting threatened sectors, often under artillery fire. Stories spread through the Ninth Army about their general's fearlessness or recklessness. The line between the two isn't always clear. A sergeant describes Model's visit to his position in July 1942. Soviet artillery was hitting our sector hard, shells landing every 30 seconds. We're in our bunkers, heads down, waiting for it to stop. Then the general appears. Just walks into our position like he's inspecting a parade ground. Shells are landing 50 meters away. He doesn't even flinch. Starts examining our fields of fire. Moves our machine gun 10 meters to the left. Says it'll cover the approach better. Then he leaves. We thought he was crazy. But you know what? We'd follow him anywhere. Because he's not asking us to do anything he won't do himself. The Soviet High Command grows increasingly frustrated. They have numerical superiority. They have Stalin's direct orders to eliminate the Rzhev salient. They have Zhukov himself planning operations. And yet they cannot break Model's defense. Soviet after-action reports reveal their confusion. One Soviet army commander writes, "The enemy defense is unlike anything we've encountered. We break the first line easily. Then we advance into pre-planned killing zones. Our casualty rates become unsustainable. When we consolidate, German counterattacks hit us from unexpected directions. We gain ground, measured in kilometers, but we lose divisions gaining it. The Soviets try everything. They attempt to encircle the salient from north and south. Model shifts forces to block the pincers. They try massive frontal assaults. These simply feed more troops into the meat grinder. They try limited objective attacks to straighten the line. Model's wandering pockets make even small gains costly. Nothing works. The Rzhev salient remains a German-held bulge that cost the Soviets approximately 250,000 casualties per major offensive just to attack, let alone capture. By early 1943, the Rzhev salient has become Model's calling card. Senior Wehrmacht officers begin studying his methods. Operative staff officers visit to observe his defensive system. Hitler himself takes notice. This middle-class general is holding against forces that destroyed other German armies. The irony is that Model has achieved this defensive success. While Hitler's official doctrine demands fanatic defense of every meter, Model isn't fanatically defending every meter. He's elastically defending selected meters while using the space between his defensive lines as killing zones. He's retreating when necessary, counterattacking when possible, preserving his combat power while destroying Soviet combat power. It's everything. Hitler's doctrine isn't flexible, calculated, focused on casualty ratios rather than territorial symbolism. But the results speak for themselves. The Ninth Army hasn't collapsed, the Rzhev salient hasn't fallen, and Model has established himself as the Wehrmacht's premier defensive commander, the general who understands that in modern industrial war, the side that maintains the better casualty exchange rate will eventually win. The Soviets are learning this lesson in blood. Model is teaching it in mathematical precision. March 1943. Model receives orders to evacuate the Rzhev salient. Not because the Soviets have broken his defense, but because Germany needs troops elsewhere and maintaining the salient ties down too many divisions. Model withdraws his forces systematically, in stages, maintaining defensive positions at each phase. The Soviets cautiously follow, expecting traps. They're right to be cautious. Model's withdrawal is as lethal as his defense. Rearguard forces inflict heavy casualties on advancing Soviet units. Booby traps and demolitions destroy anything useful. The Soviets capture the Rzhev salient, but they capture ruins and rubble, and they pay for every kilometre with more casualties. When the operation concludes, Model's Ninth Army has withdrawn intact, equipment saved, combat power preserved. The Rzhev meat grinder has operated for 14 months. Soviet casualties, approximately 2 million. German casualties, approximately 500,000. Model has created the template for German defensive operations that will define the war's next 2 years. He's proven that defense in depth, mobile reserves, elastic tactics, and systematic counterattacks can hold against massive numerical superiority. The professor has become the master, and his lesson is taught in Soviet blood on frozen ground. The Wehrmacht has found its defensive genius. Soon, Hitler will notice. February 1943. The Wolf's Lair, Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. Walter Model enters the briefing room, where Germany's fate is decided daily. He's here for his first major personal briefing with Adolf Hitler, summoned to explain how he's holding the Rzhev salient while other armies collapse. The room falls silent as Model enters. Other generals watch him, some curious, some hostile. Model carries a leather case containing maps, charts, casualty statistics, and technical diagrams. He doesn't look nervous. He looks like an engineer about to present a project report. Hitler sits at the head of the long table, flanked by his usual coterie, Keitel, Jodl, other members of the High Command. Model walks forward, spreads his maps on the table, and begins his presentation. Within 5 minutes, he's done something unprecedented. He's directly contradicting Hitler's strategic assumptions, using data to prove his point. The room holds its collective breath. Model's briefing focuses on Stalingrad, the disaster still raw in German memory. Hitler has publicly blamed the catastrophe on General Paulus's weakness, his failure to hold fanatically. Model, using his charts and maps, presents a different analysis. Mein Führer, Stalingrad, happened because operational realities were subordinated to political symbolism. The Sixth Army was encircled because we lacked sufficient mobile reserves to counter Soviet breakthroughs. The army was destroyed because it couldn't be supplied by air, a logistical impossibility that mathematics could have predicted. Other generals in the room look horrified. Model has just told Hitler that Stalingrad failed because of Hitler's decisions, not Paulus's weakness. Hitler should explode. Instead, he leans forward. "Go on," he says. Model continues for 45 minutes, presenting his defensive doctrine, explaining casualty ratios, demonstrating how elastic defense preserves combat power while static defense destroys it. He uses Rzhev as a case study. 2 million Soviet casualties versus 500,000 German casualties, achieved through defense in depth that Hitler's official doctrine forbids. Model is systematically explaining why Hitler's own orders are wrong, and Hitler is listening. The briefing's conclusion reveals the strange dynamic that will define their relationship. Model finishes his presentation and waits. Hitler stares at the maps for a long moment, then asks technical questions. How many kilometers between defensive lines? How quickly can reserves respond to breakthroughs? What percentage of artillery should be mobile versus static? Model answers each question with precise data. Hitler, a frustrated architect who never attended military academy, appreciates the systematic approach, the diagrams and calculations. This is war as technical problem, not romantic struggle. Finally, Hitler makes his assessment. Model, you are perhaps the best army commander we have. You don't give me excuses, you give me results. It's extraordinary praise. More extraordinary is what follows. Hitler tells Model he can restructure the Ninth Army's defensive positions without prior approval from High Command, unprecedented tactical latitude. Model has done what no other German general manages. He's contradicted Hitler, presented uncomfortable facts, and earned more authority rather than dismissal. The key to this magic trick? Model never questioned whether to fight, he only questioned where and how. That distinction will save hundreds of thousands of German soldiers' lives and prolong the Third Reich's death throes by months or years. Model's relationship with National Socialism explains part of Hitler's trust. Unlike the aristocratic generals who joined the Nazi Party late and reluctantly, if at all, Model signed up in 1933, relatively early for a professional officer. Was he a true believer? The historical record suggests pragmatism rather than ideology. Model recognised that the new regime would favour politically reliable officers. He attended party functions, made the right statements, cultivated the right connections. Nothing in his private correspondence suggests deep ideological commitment. Everything in his public behavior suggests calculated career management. Hitler, paranoid about aristocratic generals and their potential disloyalty, sees in Model something he can't find in the von generals. A capable commander who comes from the people, who joined the party willingly, who seems ideologically sound. The irony is that Model's party membership is pure careerism, but Hitler interprets it as loyalty, and that interpretation gives Model power. The contrast with other German generals illuminates Model's unique position. Consider Erich von Manstein, aristocrat, brilliant strategist, probably the Wehrmacht's most gifted operational mind. Manstein constantly argues with Hitler, proposes strategic withdrawals, questions decisions. Hitler grows to distrust him, will dismiss him in March 1944. Or consider Heinz Guderian, the Panzer theorist, blunt and argumentative. Guderian will be dismissed, reinstated, dismissed again. Hitler finds him valuable but unreliable. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, oldest of the aristocrats, refers to Hitler as that Bohemian corporal. In private, Hitler knows it. These men are brilliant but toxic to Hitler's ego. Now consider Model. Middle-class origin, no aristocratic pretensions, party member, technically brilliant, and crucially he frames every disagreement in terms of tactics rather than strategy. Model never tells Hitler we should retreat or we should surrender this territory. Instead, Model says, give me this position and these resources, I will hold it. Give me a different position and fewer resources, I will also hold it. You decide which, I will execute your decision. This framing gives Hitler the illusion of control while giving Model the reality of tactical flexibility. It's a brilliant psychological manipulation, and Model either understands it instinctively or has learned it through observation. The practical result of Hitler's trust becomes apparent through 1943 and 1944. Model receives appointments that would go to more senior generals. He's given crisis commands, situations where other commanders have failed. Most importantly, he receives permission to modify or implement Hitler's orders according to battlefield conditions. Other generals must request permission for any significant tactical change, permission that often arrives too late or gets denied. Model receives broad operational guidelines and then acts as he sees fit. When he does something unauthorized, when he withdraws troops, Hitler ordered to stand fast. When he abandons positions Hitler declared must be held, he reports the action as a fait accompli. Mein Führer, I conducted a tactical readjustment. Results. Casualties reduced by 40%. Defensive strength increased. Enemy offensive disrupted. Hitler, presented with success, accepts the insubordination. This pattern repeats throughout their relationship. Model breaks the rules, then justifies the rule breaking with results. Hitler tolerates from Model what he'd never tolerate from Manstein or Guderian. Statistics reveal Model's extraordinary position in the Wehrmacht hierarchy. Between February 1943 and April 1945, Model attends 47 personal meetings with Hitler, more than any other field commander. He receives 14 separate army group, or army commands, moved constantly from crisis to crisis. He's authorized to restructure entire army groups' defensive positions without prior approval, a privilege granted to no other general. When Model requests resources, equipment, replacement troops, his requests receive priority treatment. Other generals complain privately that Model gets the best divisions, the newest equipment, the most reliable officers. They're right. Hitler has decided that Model is his problem solver, the general he calls when situations look hopeless. It's extraordinary trust. And it's based on a foundation of mutual misunderstanding. Hitler thinks Model is ideologically committed. Model is actually a pragmatic careerist. Hitler thinks Model agrees with his strategic vision. Model is actually constantly subverting that vision through tactical flexibility. The relationship works because both men get what they want. Hitler gets a reliable commander who wins battles. Model gets the authority to conduct operations his way. The dark side of this relationship emerges slowly. Model's effectiveness, his ability to stabilize fronts and delay Soviet advances, prolongs the war. Every month Germany continues fighting. more people die. Soldiers, civilians, concentration camp victims. Model knows Germany is losing. His private statements to staff officers make this clear, but he continues fighting with maximum effectiveness, holding positions that less capable generals would lose quickly. The moral calculation becomes impossible to escape. Model's genius extends the war's length, which increases its total suffering. Is he responsible for those deaths? The SS running the death camps are clearly responsible, but what about the general whose defensive skill gave them more time to operate? Model doesn't supervise any death camps. He doesn't issue criminal orders against civilians, or at least none that historical record documents. He's a field commander focused on military operations. But his competence serves a criminal regime, and consequences follow from that service. By late 1943, Model's reputation in the Wehrmacht reaches its peak. Junior officers study his defensive methods. Staff colleges analyze his operations. Soldiers consider assignment to a Model-commanded unit as luck. He keeps more men alive than other generals. The nickname Der Feuerwehrmann, the Fireman, starts circulating. Hitler sends Model wherever the front is burning, wherever the crisis is worst. Model arrives, stabilizes the situation, salvages what can be salvaged. Then he's sent to the next crisis. It's exhausting work. Model is constantly on the move, constantly under pressure, constantly performing miracles with insufficient resources. But he's also accumulating extraordinary power. He's becoming indispensable, the one general Hitler completely trusts, the one commander who can modify Führer directives and get away with it. That power will save many German soldiers. It will also make Model deeply complicit in keeping Nazi Germany fighting long after military. Logic says the war is lost. The relationship's strangest aspect is Model's apparent blindness to its moral dimensions. His correspondence and recorded statements reveal a man who sees himself as a professional soldier doing his duty, saving his men's lives, serving his country. He doesn't seem to grasp, or doesn't allow himself to grasp, that serving Nazi Germany competently is itself a moral failure. The aristocratic generals like Manstein or Rundstedt could claim they were serving Germany, not the regime, maintaining a distinction between nation and party. Model, who joined the party in 1933, who accepted Hitler's trust and traded on his political reliability, cannot make that distinction credibly. He's not just serving Germany. He's serving Hitler personally, and he's doing it with devastating effectiveness. In February 1943, walking out of the Wolf's Lair with unprecedented authority in his pocket, Model is at the height of his power. Hitler trusts him. The army respects him. He's proven his defensive genius. The trajectory ahead leads only upward to more commands, more authority, more opportunities to demonstrate his system's effectiveness. What Model cannot see, what perhaps no one can see in February 1943, is that every success, every stabilized front, every delayed Soviet advance, every month of extended war just adds weight to the historical judgment that will eventually come. The professor has earned the Führer's trust. The consequences of that trust will haunt his legacy forever. June 1943, the Kursk salient. Walter Model walks the proposed attack route for Operation Citadel, Germany's last major Eastern Front offensive. Around him, staff officers point out objectives, discuss timetables, project rapid advances. Model isn't listening. He's studying the ground with an engineer's eye, calculating angles, estimating distances, envisioning what the Soviets have had 3 months to prepare. Every hillock is a potential anti-tank gun position. Every tree line could hide artillery. Every village might contain a battalion of defenders. Model stops walking and turns to his chief of staff. "The Soviets know we're coming," he says flatly. "They've had months to prepare. Look at this ground. It's perfect for defense. We're going to attack into the most prepared defensive system in military history." His chief of staff nods uncomfortably. Model continues, "And when the attack fails, we'll need to defend these positions ourselves. Start preparing fallback defensive lines immediately." The staff officers exchange worried glances. Model has just ordered preparations for failure before the offensive even begins. It's the most pessimistic and most accurate assessment any German general makes of Operation Citadel. The plan itself reflects Hitler's desperation for victory. After Stalingrad, after the Rzhev withdrawal, after months of retreat, Germany needs a major offensive success to restore confidence and convince wavering allies to stay in the war. The Kursk salient offers the target a massive Soviet-held bulge into German lines, 200 kilometers wide at its base, 150 kilometers deep. The concept is classic pincer attack. German forces strike from north and south simultaneously, meet in the middle, encircle Soviet forces inside the salient. Model commands the 9th Army attacking from the north. Field Marshal von Manstein commands Army Group South attacking from the south. On paper, the Germans commit 750,000 men, 2,700 tanks, and 2,000 aircraft. It should work. Model knows it won't. His skepticism comes from intelligence and arithmetic. Soviet defences around Kursk aren't a single line, but 8 successive defensive belts, each 3 to 5 kilometers deep, totaling nearly 200 kilometers of prepared positions. The Soviets have planted over 1.3 million mines. They've positioned 20,000 artillery pieces and mortars. They've fortified every village, dug in every tank, sighted every gun toward the expected German attack routes. Soviet forces inside and around the salient number over 1.3 million men. The math is brutal. German attackers face prepared defenders with numerical superiority in the most defense-favourable terrain on the Eastern Front. Model presents these calculations to Hitler in June. Hitler dismisses them. The attack will proceed. When the offensive succeeds, Hitler declares the world will see that Germany remains strong. Model returns to his headquarters and tells his staff, prepare defensive positions in depth. When this offensive culminates, the Soviets will counterattack, and will need to hold what we can't advance through. July 5th, 1943, 4:30 in the morning. German artillery opens Operation Citadel with a massive bombardment. Model's 9th Army begins advancing from the north toward the salient centre. Initial progress seems good. German panzers and infantry overrun the first Soviet defensive line. By noon, they've advanced 3 kilometers. Staff officers at Model's headquarters start to hope maybe the intelligence was wrong, maybe Soviet defences aren't so strong. Model studies the casualty reports coming in, and his expression doesn't change. We've taken the bait, he says quietly. Now comes the trap. He's right. On the second day, German forces hit the second defensive line. Resistance stiffens dramatically. Soviet anti-tank guns, positioned in interlocking fields of fire, start killing German tanks in large numbers. Artillery, pre-registered on likely approach routes, begins shredding German infantry. The advance slows from 3 kilometers per day to 300 meters per day. The meat grinder has started. By July 10th, Model's 9th Army has advanced 12 kilometers into the Kursk salient at a cost of over 50,000 casualties and 300 tanks destroyed. The objective, linking up with Manstein's forces advancing from the south, lies 90 kilometers away. At current casualty rates, the 9th Army will cease to exist before reaching the objective. Model can do mathematics. He requests permission to halt the offensive. Hitler refuses. In the south, Manstein's Army Group South is advancing better. 60 kilometers gained. Hitler believes success is possible. Model looks at his maps and sees something Hitler doesn't. Massive Soviet reserve formations massing behind the defensive lines. The Soviets haven't committed their mobile forces yet. They're letting the Germans exhaust themselves, attacking fortified positions, then they'll counterattack with fresh tank armies. Model has seen this pattern before. He created versions of it himself at Rzhev. But now he's on the receiving end. July 11th and 12th bring the crisis. Model's 9th Army attacks toward Ponary and Olkovatka, villages that have become fortresses. German infantry and panzers attack repeatedly, taking appalling casualties for minimal gains. A panzer commander describes the experience. We'd destroy one Soviet position, advance 50 meters, and find another position we hadn't seen. Their anti-tank guns were dug in so well we couldn't spot them until they fired. We lost 4 tanks taking a single farmhouse. Then Soviet artillery made us abandon it. We took the same objective 3 times in one day and couldn't hold it. Model visits the forward positions personally, under artillery fire, observing the carnage. He sees German grenadiers, who should be advancing, instead crouching in shell craters, pinned down by machine gun fire. He sees burning panzers, excellent German tanks destroyed by Soviet defenders who had months to prepare. The offensive is failing, exactly as Model predicted. But prediction doesn't ease the frustration of watching good soldiers die attacking positions that can't be taken. July 13th, Hitler summons Model and Manstein to the Wolf's Lair. Allied forces have landed in Sicily, threatening Italy. Hitler needs to transfer divisions to the Mediterranean. More importantly, Model brings devastating news. Soviet counteroffensives have begun west of the Kursk salient, threatening other sectors of the front. Continuing Operation Citadel while Soviet attacks succeed elsewhere makes no sense. Model presents his case using characteristic bluntness and data. Mein Führer, the Ninth Army, has suffered 50,000 casualties for 12 kilometers of advance. Soviet reserves outnumber our remaining attacking forces. Continuing the offensive will destroy my army without achieving objectives. I request permission to transition to defense immediately. Hitler rages. He calls Model defeatist. He insists victory is possible. Then Manstein speaks up. His southern forces are also stalled, unable to advance further. Hitler realizes the offensive has failed. July 13th, Operation Citadel officially ends. It's Germany's last major offensive on the Eastern Front. Model's Ninth Army has proven, tragically, that German forces can no longer conduct successful strategic offensives against prepared Soviet defenses. The Wehrmacht's future is defensive. Model's future is defensive. Everything he's learned about holding ground with insufficient forces is about to become Germany's only military strategy. Model's preparations prove their worth immediately. While other German units scramble to respond to Soviet counteroffensives, the Ninth Army transitions smoothly to defense. Model staff has prepared fallback positions, identified strong defensive terrain, positioned reserves. The same units that just attacked into Soviet positions now defend their own prepared positions. Soviet forces attacking the Ninth Army's sector face the same problem. German forces just experienced. Attacking into prepared defences produces horrific casualties. The casualty exchange ratio reverses. During the Mongol offensive phase, Model's army suffered disproportionate losses attacking. During the defensive phase, Soviet forces suffered disproportionate losses attacking. By August, Model's sector has stabilized. His army has lost territory but maintained combat cohesion, exactly his specialty. The Kursk operations statistics reveal the battle's significance and Model's prescience. Total German casualties: approximately 300,000, including nearly 200 killed or missing, and 100,000 wounded. Tank losses exceed 1,300 vehicles. The Ninth Army alone loses 50,000 men and 300 tanks in 8 days of offensive operations. Soviet casualties are higher in absolute numbers, over 800,000 total, but the Soviets can replace losses while Germany cannot. More crucially, Kursk represents a turning point in Wehrmacht capabilities. Before Kursk, offensive operations remained theoretically possible. After Kursk, they become practically impossible. The Wehrmacht's panzer divisions, bled white attacking Soviet defences, will never again accumulate the strength for major strategic offensives. Every subsequent German success will be defensive or tactical counterattack. Model's specialty becomes Germany's necessity. One of Model's staff officers later recorded a conversation from mid-July 1943. Model sits in his command post after receiving orders to transition to defence. An aide asks whether the offensive could have succeeded with different tactics. Model responds with characteristic precision. No. The Soviets had 3 months to prepare defences on terrain they selected. They had numerical superiority and unlimited ammunition. We had boldness and excellent soldiers. Boldness isn't sufficient against mathematics. We lost this battle in April when we delayed the attack to bring up more panzers. The delay gave the Soviets time to build defences we couldn't break with any realistic force. The aid? Then why did we attack? Model looks up from his maps. Because the Führer needed a victory for political reasons, and because the Wehrmacht High Command still believes will can triumph over arithmetic, I proved them wrong. Unfortunately, proving them wrong cost 50,000 casualties. By August 1943, Model's position within the Wehrmacht hierarchy has paradoxically strengthened despite presiding over a failed offensive. He predicted the offensive would fail. He prepared for transition to defence. When the offensive failed exactly as he predicted and defensive operations succeeded exactly as he prepared, his reputation as a realist and defensive master increases. Hitler continues trusting him, appreciating that Model tells uncomfortable truths rather than reassuring lies. Other generals promise Hitler that one more offensive, one more attack, one more push will restore Germany's fortunes. Model promises nothing, except that he can hold defensive positions and preserve combat power. In Germany's deteriorating strategic situation, honest competence becomes more valuable than optimistic brilliance. The professor who calculated Kursk's failure before the first shot fired has become Hitler's indispensable expert in the war's new reality: permanent defense against numerically superior enemies. Everything Model has learned, everything he's practiced, every method he's developed is about to be tested at maximum intensity. The Great Retreat is beginning. August 1943, Army Group Center Headquarters. Walter Model spreads a map across his table, and with a red pencil, he marks a line 100 kilometers west of the current front. His staff officers watch in shocked silence. They're looking at a retreat line, a position Model is planning to defend in the future, which means he's planning to abandon everything between here and there. One colonel finally speaks up. "General, those are Führer orders to hold our current positions. We cannot." Model cuts him off. "I'm not asking permission to retreat. I'm preparing contingencies for tactical readjustments that will become necessary. The Soviets are massing 5 armies opposite our front. When they attack, we'll conduct elastic defense, which may require temporary withdrawals to more favorable terrain." His staff officers understand perfectly. Model has just announced his intention to retreat using euphemisms that technically comply with Hitler's no-retreat directive while completely violating its spirit. It's a masterpiece of military bureaucratic subversion. The planning begins immediately. The strategic situation facing Army Group Center is mathematically hopeless. Soviet summer and autumn offensives following Kursk have restored their numerical superiority to overwhelming levels. The Red Army now fields over 6 million men on the Eastern Front versus approximately 3 million Wehrmacht troops. Soviet industry is producing 7,000 tanks per year versus Germany's 6,000. Soviet artillery outnumbers German by 3 to 1. Most crucially, Soviet operational competence has dramatically improved. The Red Army of 1943 isn't the disorganized force of 1941. Soviet commanders have learned combined arms warfare, logistical planning, and operational security. They're conducting operations that rival Wehrmacht professionalism. Model studies, intelligence reports, and recognizes a fundamental shift. Germany no longer has qualitative superiority to offset quantitative inferiority. The only German advantage remaining is defensive skill. Specifically, Model's defensive skill. September 1943, the first major test. Soviet forces launch Operation Bryansk, attacking with 3 full fronts, Soviet equivalent of army groups, totaling over 1.2 million men against Model's Army Group Center. The attack follows the now familiar Soviet pattern: massive artillery preparation, breakthrough, attempts at multiple points simultaneously, exploitation of successful penetrations with mobile forces. Model's response follows his equally familiar pattern: elastic defense. Forward positions resist initially, then withdraw under pressure to secondary positions. Soviet forces advance, then encounter prepared German defenses at new positions. German counterattacks hit Soviet flanks, disrupting their advance tempo. The front moves westward but never collapses. Soviet forces gain ground but can't destroy German combat power. It's Rzhev in reverse, Model retreating instead of holding, but maintaining the same casualty exchange ratios that made Rzhev so costly for the Soviets. The brilliance of Model's system reveals itself in the details. Every division in Army Group Center has planned fallback positions at 3, 5, and 10-kilometer intervals behind the front. Engineers have surveyed these positions weeks in advance, prepared defensive strongpoints, positioned supply dumps. When retreat orders arrive, units don't flee chaotically. They withdraw in stages, one battalion covering while another displaces to the rear position, then switching roles. Artillery pulls back in coordinated jumps, maintaining continuous fire support throughout the withdrawal. Logistics troops have already moved supplies to the rear positions, so withdrawing units arrive to find ammunition, fuel, and food waiting for them. A German infantry captain describes the system. "We thought we were running away. Then we reached our new position and found bunkers already dug, fields of fire already cleared, even hot food in the field kitchen. We realized the general had planned this retreat better than our last offensive." Model's innovation extends to what he calls wandering cauldrons, a refinement of his earlier wandering pockets concept. He deliberately leaves small German units, usually battalion or regimental strength, behind Soviet advancing forces. These units, supplied by air or living off captured supplies, attack Soviet rear areas, ambush supply convoys, raid headquarters, and generally create chaos behind enemy lines. Soviet commanders must divert forces from offensive operations to deal with these German pockets in their rear. By the time the Soviets eliminate or capture these units, they've delayed Soviet advances by days or weeks and inflicted casualties far exceeding the Germans lost. It's strategically ruthless. Model is deliberately leaving troops behind enemy lines, essentially sacrificing them to slow Soviet advances. But it's also effective. The casualty exchange ratio remains favourable, and Soviet offensive momentum gets disrupted. The human cost of Model's retreats emerges in soldier testimony. A grenadier in the 23rd Infantry Division writes home in October 1943, "We've retreated 200 kilometres since July. Sounds like defeat, and maybe it is, but we're still fighting. Still have our weapons, still have most of our men. Other divisions that tried to hold in place got encircled and destroyed. We bent but didn't break. Hard to feel good about retreating, but at least we're alive." This psychological dimension matters. Model's elastic defence preserves unit cohesion and morale in ways that static defence cannot. Soldiers who fight, retreat, fight again at new positions, see their survival as evidence their commander knows what he's doing. Soldiers who fight until encircled, then get destroyed, their survivors are demoralised and broken. Model's retreats keep the army functional even as it gives up ground. Statistics from August through December 1943 illustrate the system's effectiveness. Army Group Centre retreats 250 kilometres westward. But Soviet casualties during this advance total over 1.8 million versus German casualties of approximately 400,000, maintaining Model's preferred 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 casualty exchange ratio even while retreating. Most impressively, Model preserves 87% of his heavy artillery and 73% of his armour, compared to typical retreat equipment losses of 40 to 50%. How does he achieve this? Systematic planning. Every retreat includes designated routes for artillery withdrawal, tank recovery units follow combat units recovering disabled vehicles. Logistics troops establish intermediate supply points where retreating units can refuel and rearm. Nothing is left to chance. Model treats retreat like he treats defence, as an engineering problem with calculable solutions. The moral dimension of Model's successful retreats creates uncomfortable questions. Every day, Model delays Soviet advances, the war continues. Concentration camps continue operating, civilian populations continue suffering under German occupation, partisan reprisals continue. Model is fighting defensive battles brilliantly, but what is he defending? Objectively, he's defending Nazi Germany's capacity to continue the war. The longer Germany fights, the more people die, military and civilian, German and otherwise. Model's correspondence shows no evidence he grapples with these questions. His focus remains narrowly military: preserve combat power, maintain unit cohesion, inflict maximum casualties on the enemy, hold as much ground as possible for as long as possible. He's solving the military problem without addressing the political or moral context. Whether this represents compartmentalization, willful blindness, or genuine belief that his duty is purely military remains unclear. What's clear is that his competence has consequences beyond battlefield success. By December 1943, Model's reputation reaches a new level. He's conducted a strategic retreat of 250 kilometres without losing cohesion or surrendering disproportionate casualties. Wehrmacht training manuals begin incorporating his techniques. Senior officers visit his headquarters to observe his staff procedures. Hitler awards him the Swords to his Knight's Cross with oak leaves, one of Germany's highest military honours. The Führer's praise is effusive. Model does what I need. He holds what can be held, he withdraws when necessary, and he never loses his army doing either. This trust will shape the war's next 18 months. Hitler will send Model from crisis to crisis, assigning him the Wehrmacht's most desperate situations. And Model will repeatedly perform the same miracle: arrive at a collapsing front, stabilize it through elastic defense and tactical flexibility, preserve combat power while inflicting heavy enemy casualties. The tragedy inherent in Model's success becomes visible in hindsight. He's so good at defensive warfare that he prolongs German resistance far beyond what less competent generals could achieve. Army Group Center should have collapsed completely in autumn 1943. Under different leadership, it might have. Under Model's leadership, it retreats intact, ready to fight another defensive battle. This pattern will repeat across the eastern and later western fronts. Model arrives, situations stabilize, German resistance continues. Every month of continued resistance represents thousands of additional casualties, prolonged suffering in occupied territories, and more time for concentration camps to operate. The Wehrmacht needed a defensive genius to manage its strategic retreat. In Walter Model, it found exactly that, and finding exactly that made Germany's defeat slower, more costly, and more complete. The professor's equation works perfectly on military terms. On moral and human terms, the equation's solution is measured in corpses and prolonged agony. Model, planning his next defensive line on another map with another red pencil, doesn't seem to calculate those variables. Or, if he does, he's not letting the calculation affect his professional performance. The Great Retreat continues, westward, masterminded by a man whose technical brilliance makes defeat orderly, manageable, and therefore extended far beyond what incompetence would have permitted. January 1944. A telephone rings in Walter Model's command post near Vitebsk. It's the direct line from the Führer headquarters, the phone that every German general dreads. Model picks up, listens for 30 seconds, then interrupts. Mein Führer, with respect, that order is militarily impossible. The room goes silent. Staff officers freeze. Nobody interrupts Adolf Hitler. Model continues, his voice calm and factual. I can hold Kiev and lose an army group, or I can retreat and save an army group. Mathematics dictates the choice. Which do you prefer? There's shouting on the other end of the line, Hitler's voice audible even through the receiver. Model holds the phone slightly away from his ear, waits for the tirade to finish, then responds, I understand, mein Führer. I will prepare both options. You will have detailed casualty projections for each by tonight. He hangs up. An aide whispers, General, you just told the Führer no. Model looks up from his maps. I told him the truth. He can accept it or dismiss me. Either way, I won't order men to die for political symbolism. This scene, reconstructed from staff officer testimony, illustrates Model's unique relationship with Hitler. Other German generals who contradicted the Führer found themselves dismissed, sidelined, or worse. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, arguably Germany's most brilliant strategist, constantly argued with Hitler about strategic withdrawals. Result, dismissed in March 1944. General Heinz Guderian, the Panzer innovator, repeatedly clashed with Hitler over operational decisions. Result, dismissed, reinstated, dismissed again. Even Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the propaganda hero, faced Hitler's wrath when he suggested making peace with the Western Allies. Result: forced suicide in October 1944. Yet Model contradicts, argues, and occasionally simply ignores Hitler's orders, and not only survives, but thrives. Between January 1944 and April 1945, Model modifies or outright ignores 23 direct Führer orders, a record meticulously documented by post-war historians analysing Wehrmacht communications logs. How does he survive this insubordination? The answer reveals Model's genius, which extends beyond tactics into psychology. Model's survival technique rests on crucial framing. He never questions whether Germany should fight. He never suggests making peace. He never argues about strategic objectives or political goals. Instead, he presents every disagreement as a technical problem with alternative solutions. When Hitler orders, hold position X at all costs, Model doesn't say that's strategically unsound. He says, I can hold position X with these forces and these casualties, or hold position Y with these forces and these casualties. Here are the comparative projections. This framing gives Hitler choice while respecting Hitler's authority. More cunningly, Model always presents his preferred option as requiring fewer casualties and better achieving Hitler's stated objectives. A staff officer who witnessed dozens of these exchanges explains, "The general had a gift. He'd present two options. Make sure his preferred option sounded more rational, more loyal, more committed to victory. Then he'd wait for Hitler to choose what Model had already decided to do. Hitler thought he was making decisions, Model was making Hitler choose Model's decisions." The psychological manipulation goes deeper. Model understands Hitler's insecurities around aristocratic generals. Hitler, the Austrian corporal who never attended military academy, always feels intellectually inferior to the Prussian von generals with their elegant strategic theories and aristocratic bearing. Model, the music teacher's son, has no aristocratic pretensions. He presents war as technical problem solving, using charts, statistics, and engineering diagrams. Hitler, the frustrated architect, responds to this systematic approach. When Manstein presents sweeping operational concepts requiring strategic vision to understand, Hitler feels his own lack of military education. When Model presents casualty projections and logistics calculations, Hitler feels competent to evaluate them. Model makes Hitler feel smart, which Manstein never does. This psychological dynamic proves more valuable than Manstein's superior strategic sense. January 1944 provides a case study. Soviet forces launch an offensive that threatens to encircle German forces at Kirovograd in Ukraine. Hitler orders the city held at all costs. Model, commanding Army Group South, calculates that holding Kirovograd will result in 60,000 German casualties within 2 weeks. He presents Hitler with an alternative: withdraw 20 kilometers to the Ginaloy, Tikich River, a natural defensive barrier, and establish a fortified line. Projected casualties, 12,000. Model frames this as achieving your objective of preventing Soviet breakthrough with 75% fewer German casualties. Hitler, presented with proof that retreat actually serves his goals better than standing fast, authorizes the withdrawal. Model conducts the operation without waiting for formal approval, then reports success. Hitler, faced with a favorable result, accepts the insubordination. Model has retreated against Hitler's instincts, saved 48,000 casualties, and strengthened his position with the Führer. It's bureaucratic judo of the highest order. But Model's special status has a dark side. His ability to modify Hitler's orders, his success in preserving German combat power through elastic defense, his effectiveness at stabilizing collapsing fronts, all these competencies serve to prolong the war. Every month, Model keeps German armies. Functional is another month of Holocaust operations, another month of occupied territory suffering, another month of total war, grinding millions of people into corpses. The moral accounting becomes inescapable. Between January 1944 and May 1945, Model's various commands, Army Group North, Army Group Center, Army Group South Ukraine, Army Group B, collectively conduct defensive operations that kill or wound approximately 3 million Soviet soldiers while suffering approximately 800,000 German casualties. Model preserves combat power brilliantly. He delays Soviet advances masterfully. He saves hundreds of thousands of German soldiers from encirclement and death. And in doing so, he enables Nazi Germany to continue fighting long after military logic says the war is lost. Did Model understand this moral dimension? His private correspondence suggests compartmentalization rather than blindness. In a February 1944 letter to his wife, Model writes, "The strategic situation is hopeless. We cannot win this war, but we can fight honorably, preserving our soldiers' lives while conducting the defense Germany requires." The letter reveals Model's framework. He sees his duty as military, separate from political or moral considerations. He's not fighting to preserve Nazi ideology. He's fighting to preserve German soldiers, to conduct professional military operations, to do his job competently. This separation of professional duty from political context is psychologically convenient. It allows Model to function without confronting what his competence enables. But historical judgment doesn't accept this separation. Professional competence in service of criminal regime becomes complicity, regardless of personal motivations. The contrast with other generals illuminates Model's choice. Some Wehrmacht generals, notably Ludwig Beck and Erwin von Witzleben, recognized the regime's criminality and plotted against Hitler, paying with their lives after the July 1944 bomb plot failed. Others, like Rommel, peripherally, expressed doubts about Hitler's leadership and faced consequences. Model never joins any resistance, never expresses political doubts to anyone beyond his inner circle, never considers anything except continued military service. When staff officers occasionally hint at regime criticism, Model shuts them down. We are soldiers. Politics is not our concern. This apolitical stance is itself political. By refusing to question the regime, Model implicitly supports it. By serving competently, he strengthens it. The apolitical professional soldier is a convenient fiction that Model either believes or finds useful to believe. March 1944 brings another example of Model's special status. Hitler orders Model to prevent Soviet forces from crossing the Dniester River in Ukraine at all costs. Model evaluates the situation, concludes the river line can't be held, and withdraws German forces across the river before Soviet forces arrive. He establishes defensive positions on the western bank, pre-positioned artillery, and prepared fallback lines. When Soviet forces reach the Dniester, they find the eastern bank undefended, but the western bank fortified. Their assault across the river fails, with heavy casualties. Model reports to Hitler, unable to prevent Soviet forces from reaching the Dniester as ordered. However, established strong defensive positions that prevented Soviet crossing of river. Ours 4,000, theirs estimated 35,000. Hitler should be furious at the disobeyed order. Instead, he accepts Model's reframing. The objective wasn't defending the eastern bank, but preventing Soviet river crossing, which Model accomplished. It's a masterclass in managing up. Model retroactively redefines success criteria to match what he actually did rather than what Hitler ordered. By mid-1944, Model's pattern is established. He receives impossible orders, modifies them to achievable objectives, executes his modified plan without explicit authorization, then reports success using framing that satisfies Hitler. Other generals can't replicate this because they lack Model's combination of technical credibility, political reliability through party membership, and psychological insight into Hitler's insecurities. Model has created a unique position, the general who can say no without saying no, who can retreat while calling it tactical adjustment, who can ignore orders while claiming to fulfill them. This position saves countless German soldiers from suicidal last stands. It also keeps German armies fighting effectively far longer than they otherwise would. Model is simultaneously Germany's most valuable field commander and the most problematic from a moral standpoint. His very competence is criminal in its consequences. A staff officer records Model's response when questioned about the war's trajectory. It's April 1944. Soviet forces are advancing on all fronts. Allied forces are preparing to invade France. Germany's strategic situation is objectively hopeless. The officer asks whether continued resistance makes sense. Model's answer is revealing. Sense is a political question. My question is professional. Can I preserve my soldiers' lives while conducting the defense that duty requires? The answer is yes, if I'm allowed tactical flexibility. So I will continue. The alternative is to surrender, which would be dishonorable, or to follow Hitler's suicidal stand-fast orders, which would be murder. I choose the third path, elastic defense that preserves combat power. If that prolongs the war, that's a consequence of competence. I'm a soldier, not a politician. It's a perfect encapsulation of Model's worldview and its limitations. He's reduced moral questions to technical ones, duty to professional performance, consequences to unavoidable side effects. The compartmentalization is complete. And Germany, for better and worse, mostly worse, has found the perfect general for its death spiral. A man who can manage retreat brilliantly without ever questioning why retreat is necessary or what retreat is delaying. January 31st, 1944. Walter Model's aircraft touches down at Army Group North headquarters near Narva, Estonia. He steps out into freezing Baltic wind and immediately begins questioning the staff officers who meet him. How many troops are cut off? What are current supply levels? Where are the nearest Soviet penetrations? The answers paint a catastrophic picture. Over 300,000 German troops are partially encircled between Lake Peipus and the Gulf of Finland. Soviet forces have nearly closed the ring. Supply lines are under constant attack. The previous commander, Field Marshal Georg von Küchler, has been dismissed for losing control of the situation. Model has been sent to perform a miracle. Again, he looks at the maps, does rapid calculations, then issues his first order. Prepare for breakout operations. We're not holding this pocket, we're evacuating it. Staff officers stare. Model continues. And prepare offensive operations to create an exit corridor. We'll attack our way out. Now they're certain he's insane. This army group is barely holding on, and the new commander wants to attack? The situation Model inherits represents one of the Wehrmacht's worst crises. Army Group North's 18th Army, commanded by General Georg Lindemann, occupies positions east of Narva. Soviet forces have attacked from multiple directions, creating a semicircular encirclement. The German pocket stretches roughly 60 kilometers east to west, 40 kilometers north to south. Inside are 3 corps totaling approximately 300,000 men. Outside the pocket, Soviet forces number over 500,000, with local superiority at key points reaching 3-1 or 4-1. Standard military doctrine says surrounded forces should establish perimeter defense and wait for relief from outside. Model immediately rejects standard doctrine. Static defense in encirclement creates a target for Soviet artillery and air power. We'll be destroyed within weeks. Instead, we attack, create chaos. Break the encirclement before the Soviets fully establish it. February 5th, 1944. Model personally leads a reconnaissance mission to the encirclement perimeter. This isn't metaphorical leadership from command post. Model, accompanied only by a small security detail, drives to within 500 meters of Soviet positions. Artillery shells land close enough that his driver repeatedly urges retreat. Model ignores him, studying Soviet positions through binoculars, sketching in his notebook, calculating. A staff officer who accompanied him later recalled, "The general walked along our forward trenches like he was inspecting barracks. Shells exploding 200 meters away, machine gun fire audible from Soviet positions. He didn't flinch, just kept making notes about fields of fire and optimal attack routes. I thought he'd lost his mind. Then I realized he was mapping exactly where to attack." Model identifies a 2-kilometer sector where Soviet lines appear thinner, where attacking German forces could potentially punch through before Soviet reserves respond. It's a tiny gap in a massive encirclement. Model decides it's enough. February 14th through 16th. Model launches his breakout operation. He concentrates every available tank, assault gun, and Panzer Grenadier unit at the single 2-kilometer sector he identified. German artillery, every gun in the pocket that can range the target area, opens simultaneous bombardment for 2 hours. German shells pulverize the narrow Soviet sector. Then panzers attack, followed by infantry. The concentration is overwhelming at this single point. Soviet defenders, spread along a 60-kilometer perimeter, cannot mass sufficient forces fast enough to stop the German thrust. By February 15th, German forces have punched a hole in the encirclement. The corridor is narrow, barely 2 kilometers wide, under constant Soviet artillery fire, but it's open. Model immediately orders the evacuation to begin. Wounded first, then heavy equipment, then combat units. Soviet forces attack the corridor from both sides, trying to close it. Model commits his mobile reserves to hold the corridor open, accepting heavy casualties to maintain the escape route. The operation's most remarkable aspect is its organization under catastrophic conditions. 300,000 men must move through a 2-kilometer corridor while under enemy fire. Chaos should be inevitable. Instead, Model staff has planned every detail. Units receive specific time windows for corridor transit. Traffic control points manage flow, preventing bottlenecks. Engineers continuously repair the road damaged. By artillery, medical units evacuate wounded in organized waves. Supply trucks move ammunition forward while evacuating soldiers move rearward. both streams somehow flowing simultaneously. A German major describes the scene. It was organized chaos, shells landing constantly, buildings burning, but everyone knew their movement time, their route, their destination. The general staff had planned it like railway timetable. You moved when scheduled or you got left behind. Sounds harsh. It's what saved us. Inside the pocket, units conduct fighting withdrawal to the corridor. This isn't panicked retreat, but systematic contraction. Rearguard forces establish successive defensive positions, hold until pressure becomes overwhelming, then fall back to the next position. Soviet forces pursuing them find empty trenches, booby traps, and pre-registered artillery fire. The withdrawal inflicts continuous casualties on Soviet attackers, while the main German force escapes. Model's concept of elastic defense applies even to evacuation operations. Space trades for time. Time allows evacuation. Evacuation preserves combat power. By February 20th, over 250,000 German troops have escaped through the corridor. Approximately 45,000 remain, holding the corridor's shoulders, preparing their own withdrawal. Model orders them to break out in small groups after dark, infiltrating through Soviet positions rather than using the now closed corridor. Most succeed. By February 29th, the pocket has been evacuated. Army Group North's 18th Army, which should have been destroyed, remains combat effective west of Narva. The casualty statistics reveal both the operation's cost and its effectiveness. German losses total approximately 45,000 killed, wounded, or missing during the month-long operation. Soviet losses, according to post-war Soviet sources, exceed 150,000. The casualty exchange ratio, even during desperate evacuation operation, favours Germany 3-1. More importantly, Model has saved 250,000 German soldiers who would have been killed or captured in the pocket's collapse. Equipment losses are substantial, hundreds of artillery pieces and vehicles destroyed or abandoned, but infantry formations remain intact. Within weeks, Model has rebuilt defensive positions along the Narva line. Army Group North, which appeared doomed in late January, is holding a stable front in early March. Hitler's decision to send Model has proven correct again. The Fireman has extinguished another blaze. But Soviet commanders learned from the experience. Marshal Leonid Govorov, commanding the Leningrad front opposing Army Group North, writes in his after-action analysis, "Enemy commander demonstrated tactical flexibility and aggressive spirit unexpected in encircled force. Future encirclement operations must close the ring more quickly and defend perimeter more heavily to prevent breakout. The Red Army is adapting to Model's methods. His elastic defense, his aggressive counterattacks, his willingness to abandon positions and attack simultaneously, these tactics work brilliantly when Soviets don't expect them." But Soviet commanders are learning. They're beginning to position reserves specifically to counter Model's mobile reserves. They're fortifying their encirclement perimeters against breakout attempts. The tactical innovation race continues, and the Soviets have advantages in numbers that eventually overwhelm any tactical superiority. Model's personal leadership during the Army Group North crisis establishes his legend among German soldiers. Stories circulate through the Wehrmacht about Der Feuerwehrmann, who appears at desperate situations and somehow stabilizes them. Soldiers begin considering assignment to Model's command as fortunate rather than unlucky. Yes, Model commanded units face difficult situations. That's why he's sent there. But Model commanded units also tend to survive those situations when units under other commanders get destroyed. A German corporal writes home in March 1944, "We've been transferred to Model's army group. Everyone says he's hard, but he's smart. Keeps us alive when other generals get their men killed. If we have to retreat all the way to Berlin, I'd rather do it under Model than anyone else. It's simultaneously a vote of confidence and an acknowledgement that Germany is losing. The soldiers trust Model to manage the defeat competently, which is both his greatest achievement and his most damning legacy." The Army Group North relief operation demonstrates a pattern that will define Model's last year. Hitler identifies a crisis, usually an encirclement or collapsing front. Hitler sends Model. Model arrives, evaluates the situation, implements some combination of elastic defense and aggressive counterattacks. The immediate crisis stabilizes. German forces survive to fight another defensive battle. The front moves westward, but it doesn't collapse. It's a pattern that serves German strategic interests in the narrowest sense. Armies remain functional, prolonging resistance. But it serves no larger German interest because Germany has no path to victory. Model is brilliantly managing an inevitable defeat, extending its timeline, reducing its immediate chaos, making it more orderly. In February 1944, after saving Army Group North, Model is the Wehrmacht's most valuable commander. He's also, though he doesn't acknowledge it, Nazi Germany's most effective enabler. The general whose competence allows a criminal regime to continue functioning months longer than incompetence would have permitted. The soldiers he saved at Narva will fight more battles, inflict more casualties, suffer more casualties themselves. He's given them additional months of life, probably, and additional months of war, certainly. Whether that trade is worth making depends on moral calculations. Model apparently never performs. June 19th, 1944. Walter Model sits in his Army Group Center headquarters near Minsk, reviewing intelligence reports that should terrify any German commander. Soviet forces are massing opposite his front in unprecedented numbers. Over 1.6 million men, over 5,000 tanks, nearly 30,000 artillery pieces and mortars. The numbers are so large, his intelligence officers initially doubt them. Model doesn't doubt them. He's been studying Soviet preparations for weeks, watching railway movements, tracking unit identifications, calculating supply accumulations. The Soviets are preparing the largest offensive in military history, and it's aimed directly at his army group. Model immediately requests permission to withdraw to more defensible positions, shortening his line, concentrating his forces. Hitler refuses. The positions must be held. Model tries again, presenting detailed casualty projections. Mein Führer, if we remain in current positions when the offensive begins, Army Group Center will be destroyed within 2 weeks. Hitler's response is unequivocal. No retreat. Fortified positions will hold. Model hangs up the phone and turns to his chief of staff. Prepare contingency plans for unauthorized withdrawal. When the attack comes, we won't have time to debate with Berlin. The strategic context makes Model's situation nearly impossible. Army Group Center holds a front stretching over 700 kilometers from Vitebsk in the north to Kovel in the south. The line forms a massive salient projecting eastward, exactly the type of vulnerable bulge that invites encirclement. Model commands 4 armies totaling approximately 490,000 combat troops, 900 tanks and assault guns, and 10,000 artillery pieces. On paper, it's a substantial force. Against what the Soviets are committing, it's desperately insufficient. The force ratio approaches 4-1 in Soviet favour, and that's before considering Soviet advantages in artillery and air power. Model needs to shorten his line, withdraw the salient, concentrate forces in defensible positions. Hitler, obsessed with holding territory for political reasons, forbids any withdrawal. The contradiction between military necessity and political directive is about to destroy Army Group Center. The Soviet plan, Operation Bagration, is named after a Russian general who fought Napoleon and represents the Red Army's most sophisticated operation to date. Marshal Georgy Zhukov and Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky coordinate 4 Soviet fronts in simultaneous attacks designed to encircle German forces in multiple pockets. The operation employs maskirovka, Soviet military deception, at unprecedented scale. False radio traffic suggests attacks will come south of the Pripyat marshes. Dummy tanks and artillery positions draw German aerial reconnaissance to wrong sectors. Actual Soviet buildup opposite Army Group Center is camouflaged, conducted at night, radio silent. Model suspects deception. His intelligence officers warn him the main attack is coming to his front, but the evidence is circumstantial. Some German high command officers believe the attack will come farther south. The debate delays any defensive preparations. By the time certainty arrives, it's too late. June 23rd, 1944, 4 in the morning. The largest artillery barrage in human history to that date begins. Over 30,000 Soviet guns and mortars open fire simultaneously across a 400-kilometre front. German positions, identified by weeks of reconnaissance, disappear under explosive weight. The bombardment continues for 2 hours. Communications, trenches collapse. Command bunkers cave in. Forward infantry positions simply ceased to exist. A German lieutenant who survives describes the experience. The world became nothing but explosions. Couldn't hear, couldn't see, couldn't breathe. Just pressed against the earth and prayed. When it stopped, I climbed out of what remained of my bunker. My platoon was gone. Not retreated, gone. 37 men vaporized or buried. I found pieces of 3 bodies. At 6 in the morning, Soviet infantry and tanks attack. German defenders, those who survived the bombardment, attempt resistance. But the Soviet numerical advantage at breakthrough points reaches 6-1, 7-1, sometimes 10-1. German positions are overrun within hours. By June 24th, the dimensions of catastrophe become clear at Model's headquarters. Reports arrive in fragmentary bursts before communications cut off entirely. 3rd Panzer Army in the north, breakthrough at Vitebsk, divisions surrounded. 4th Army in the center, multiple penetrations, armor unable to counterattack effectively. 9th Army in the south, Soviet forces have advanced 30 kilometers in one day. Model's staff officers look at the map in horror. The Soviet plan is working perfectly. Breakthroughs at multiple points are preventing German reserves from concentrating against any single threat. Model himself appears stunned. Perhaps the only time in his career subordinates see him uncertain. He issues orders for mobile reserves to counterattack, then countermands them when reports indicate Soviet forces are already behind the reserve positions. By evening June 24th, Army Group Center's front has been shattered in dozens of places. There is no longer a continuous line. There are only isolated German units fighting in encirclement or attempting retreat. June 25th through 28th bring accelerating disaster. Soviet mobile forces, advancing through gaps in German defences, encircle entire divisions. At Vitebsk, 5 German divisions numbering 35,000 men are surrounded. Hitler orders them to hold as fortified place. Model knows they're doomed, but can't countermand the Führer order. By June 27th, Vitebsk falls, most defenders killed or captured. At Bobruisk, another 45,000 German troops are encircled. They attempt breakout, few succeed. Soviet air power, with complete air superiority, hunts retreating German columns. Luftwaffe fighters and ground attack aircraft, so dominant in earlier war years, are nearly absent. Model's requests for air support go largely unfulfilled. The Luftwaffe has been bled white over Germany and France. German units retreat westward in whatever direction appears least occupied by Soviet forces. Organization breaks down. Divisions become regiments, regiments become battalions, battalions become groups of frightened men walking west hoping to find German lines. Model's attempt to stabilize the situation demonstrates his methods pushed beyond their breaking point. He orders every available unit to establish defensive positions along the Berezina River, a natural barrier he identified weeks earlier as a fallback line. But Soviet forces reach the Berezina before many German units, attacking across the river before defenses are established. Model tries to implement his elastic defense doctrine, identifying successive fallback lines where retreating units can reorganize, but the Soviet advance is too fast. Units arrive at planned defensive positions to find Soviet forces already there. Model's wandering pocket concept becomes unintended reality. German units behind Soviet lines, not by plan but by battlefield chaos, attempting to fight their way back to German lines. Some succeed, most don't. By early July, Model estimates Army Group Center has lost over 300,000 men killed, wounded, or missing in 10 days. It's worse than Stalingrad in terms of divisions destroyed, though less publicized. June 28th. Model flies to Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia for a personal briefing. It's one of the most difficult meetings in Model's career. He must tell Hitler that Army Group Center, the force protecting the direct route to Germany, has been catastrophically defeated. He enters the briefing room carrying maps marked with red symbols indicating destroyed divisions. Hitler sees the maps and erupts before Model speaks. How could you lose an entire army group in 1 week? Model characteristically responds with facts rather than excuses. Mein Führer, Army Group Center was defending a 700-kilometer front with insufficient forces against 4-1 numerical superiority. I requested permission to withdraw to shorter, more defensible lines. Permission was denied. I requested armor reserves. They were sent to France in anticipation of Allied invasion. I requested Luftwaffe support. The Luftwaffe no longer has sufficient strength in this sector. Army Group Center was destroyed because it was given an impossible mission with insufficient resources. The room goes silent. Model has just blamed Hitler for the disaster. Staff officers expect explosion. Instead, Hitler deflates. He knows Model is right. After a long silence, Hitler asks, "Can you restore the front?" Model studies his maps. Before answering, "Give me 3 weeks and 200,000 replacement troops, and I can establish a stable line west of Minsk. But it will be 300 kilometers west of our current positions. Most of Belarus will be lost." Hitler has no choice. "Do it," he says quietly. The casualty statistics for Operation Bagration define it as one of history's most successful military operations and one of Germany's worst defeats. German casualties total approximately 400,000, including 300,000 killed or captured. 28 divisions are destroyed outright. Soviet casualties exceed 200,000, but represent acceptable losses given the strategic results. The Red Army advances 500 kilometers in 5 weeks, liberating most of Belarus and reaching Poland. More importantly, Operation Bagration destroys the Wehrmacht's strategic reserve on the Eastern Front. Germany has no remaining forces to stop Soviet advances. From July 1944 onward, Soviet armies can advance at will, limited only by logistics and their own casualties. Model's defensive genius, so effective at Rzhev and Narva, has met an enemy too strong and too skillful to defeat with tactical excellence. The Wehrmacht's quantitative inferiority has reached the point where quality no longer compensates. Model's failure at Bagration, his only clear operational defeat, raises uncomfortable questions about his entire defensive system. His methods work brilliantly when he has tactical flexibility, sufficient resources, and opponents who attack predictably. Bagration denies him all three. He cannot withdraw to better positions because Hitler forbids it until too late. He lacks sufficient reserves to execute his mobile counterattack doctrine. Soviet operational security and deception prevent him from concentrating forces at threatened points. Most devastatingly, Soviet operational art has evolved to specifically counter Model's methods. Soviet commanders now expect German elastic defense and plan operations to exploit it, making breakthroughs at multiple points simultaneously so German reserves cannot respond effectively. Model has been outgeneraled not by one Soviet commander but by the entire Soviet system. The Red Army of June 1944 isn't the force Model faced at Rzhev in 1942. It's learned from 2 years of defeats, it's learned in part from fighting Model, and it's applied those lessons to devastating effect. By mid-July 1944, Model has stabilized what remains of Army Group Center 300 kilometers west of its starting positions. He's established defensive lines along river barriers, concentrated surviving units, received some reinforcements. The front isn't collapsing further, but it's not the triumph that characterized his earlier crisis commands, it's damage control. Germany has suffered its worst defeat since Stalingrad, and Model, for the first time, couldn't prevent it. His reputation remains intact. He did as well as anyone could have under the circumstances, but the aura of invincibility is gone. Model has proven he can be beaten when faced with overwhelming force, insufficient resources, and an opponent who's learned to counter his methods. The implication for Germany's future is clear. As Soviet numerical superiority grows and Soviet operational competence increases, even Model's defensive genius cannot prevent eventual defeat. The question is no longer whether Germany will lose, but how long Model can delay that loss and at what cost in German and Soviet casualties. The professor's equation still works, but the variables have shifted against him. And mathematics, his favoured tool, now predicts inevitable German defeat, regardless of tactical skill. Bagration is the moment that reality becomes undeniable, even to Walter Model. August 17th, 1944. A German staff car races through the French countryside toward an emergency headquarters near Fontainebleau. Inside sits Walter Model, exhausted from 36 hours of travel studying maps of a theatre he's never commanded in. 3 days ago, he was stabilizing the Eastern Front after Bagration's catastrophe. Yesterday, Hitler summoned him to East Prussia for urgent orders. Today, he's the new Commander-in-Chief West, responsible for all German forces in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. His mission? Salvage the Wehrmacht's collapse following the Allied breakout from Normandy. Model looks at the maps showing Allied advances and German retreat routes. He sees immediately that he's not inheriting a defensive front, he's inheriting a route. The only question is whether any army can be saved from the disaster. As his car approaches headquarters, Model sees the evidence everywhere. Columns of retreating German soldiers, abandoned vehicles, wounded men on improvised stretchers. The Western Front is disintegrating. Model has approximately 72 hours to prevent complete collapse. The situation Model inherits represents Germany's worst military crisis since Stalingrad. Following the successful Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6th, German forces conducted a stubborn but ultimately futile defence. Through June and July, the Wehrmacht held Allied forces in the Bocage country of Normandy, inflicting heavy casualties but unable to prevent the build-up of overwhelming Allied strength. On July 25th, Operation Cobra, the American breakout operation, shattered German defences. By August, Allied armoured divisions are racing across France. Most catastrophically, German forces at Falaise have been encircled. Approximately 100,000 German troops are trapped in the Falaise pocket, being systematically destroyed by Allied air and ground forces. Model's predecessor, Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, has lost control of the situation and, facing Hitler's wrath and suspicion of involvement in the July 20th bomb plot against Hitler, will commit suicide within days. Model arrives to find approximately 400,000 German troops in France, attempting to retreat eastward while Allied forces pursue and destroy them. Model's first order as Commander-in-Chief, West shocks his new staff officers. Abandon Falaise. Save what can be saved. Everything else is secondary. It's a direct contradiction of Hitler's standing orders to hold every position. But Model recognizes that approximately 40,000 German troops can still escape the Falaise pocket if they retreat immediately, abandoning heavy equipment and wounded. Another 60,000 are already lost, killed, or certain to be captured. Model calculates save 40,000 now or lose 100,000 trying to save everyone. The equation is simple. He orders the evacuation, informing Hitler afterward rather than requesting permission. By August 21st, approximately 50,000 German troops have escaped Falaise, a better result than Model expected, but still a catastrophic loss. The Falaise pocket cost Germany over 100,000 casualties and most of the heavy equipment of two armies, but Model has saved enough men to form the nucleus of reconstituted divisions. Without that nucleus, the entire Wehrmacht in the West would cease to exist as an organised force. August 23rd through 25th, Model personally organises the retreat. Unlike the chaotic flight that characterised German forces before his arrival, Model imposes order through systematic planning. He designates Seine River crossing points and assigns units specific routes and times for crossing. He positions rear guard forces at key choke points to delay Allied pursuit. He orders demolition of bridges after units cross to slow Allied advances. Most crucially, he identifies the West Wall, the Siegfried line fortifications along Germany's western border, as the objective. Retreat to the West Wall, he orders. Not Germany, not the Rhine, the West Wall. Everything between here and there is expendable space. The men are not expendable. Move fast, travel light, get to the fortifications. It's Model's Eastern Front doctrine applied to the Western theatre. Trade space for time, preserve combat power, establish defence at a prepared position rather than trying to hold everywhere. The challenge in the West differs fundamentally from Model's Eastern Front experience. On the Eastern Front, Model fought Soviet forces who, despite improving competence, still made tactical mistakes and faced logistical challenges that Model could exploit. The Western Allies present different problems. American, British, and Canadian forces have overwhelming material superiority, complete air dominance, and mature logistical systems. Allied fighter bombers hunt German forces day and night, making movement in daylight nearly suicidal. Allied artillery, positioned using aerial observation, delivers accurate fire at unprecedented ranges. Most challenging for model Allied commanders are competent professionals who don't make the operational errors. Soviet commanders made in 1941 and 1942. General Dwight Eisenhower coordinates multiple armies across a broad front. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery and General George Patton command with aggressive competence. Model cannot exploit enemy mistakes because the Allies make few mistakes. He must defeat material superiority with empty hands. Model's solution focuses on the only advantage he possesses: time urgency. Allied forces, advancing rapidly from Normandy, have outrun their supply lines. Fuel shortages limit how far Allied armour can pursue. This logistical breathing space, perhaps 3 to 4 weeks, gives Model time to establish defensive positions if he can move German forces fast enough. He ruthlessly prioritizes infantry units retreat on foot, abandoning damaged vehicles and heavy equipment. Armour units retreat in bounds, stopping to fight, delaying actions, then continue withdrawal. Artillery that can't move gets destroyed rather than captured. Wounded who can walk march with their units. Those who cannot are left in field hospitals. It's brutal calculus, but Model applies it without hesitation. Save the army by sacrificing everything else. A staff officer questions abandoning so much equipment. Model's response is characteristic. Equipment can be replaced. Trained soldiers cannot. We're trading metal for men. It's the only trade that makes sense. By early September 1944, Model has achieved what seemed impossible 2 weeks earlier. Approximately 300,000 German troops have reached the West Wall, the fortified line along Germany's western border. They've lost most of their heavy equipment, they're exhausted and demoralized, but they're alive and they're behind. Fortifications. Model immediately begins reorganizing shattered units. Divisions that numbered 10,000 men now number 3,000. He combines them into Kampf, Gruppen, battle groups, with mixed infantry and armour. He positions these groups in the West Wall's bunkers and defensive positions. He coordinates with fortress battalions, garrison troops normally used for occupation duty, integrating them into the defensive line. Within 3 weeks of taking command, Model has created a continuous defensive front where none existed. It's not strong, attacking it would probably succeed, but it exists. And Allied forces, reaching the West Wall in early September, discover that easy pursuit has ended. They're facing prepared defences again. Allied commanders are frustrated by Model's accomplishment. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commanding American forces, later writes, "In mid-August, we expected to be in Germany by September 1st. Model's arrival changed everything. The route became an organised retreat. When we reached the German border, we found fortifications manned by troops who shouldn't have existed. Model had conjured an army from the ruins of Normandy." British intelligence assessments from September 1944 note, Model is the most capable German defensive commander. His transfer to the West has significantly extended the campaign timeline. He cannot prevent Allied victory, but will make it far more costly than anticipated. The Allies recognise Model's achievement, even as they prepare to attack through it. Model has bought Germany months, possibly as much as 6 months, of additional resistance. Those months will cost hundreds of thousands of additional casualties on all sides. The moral weight of Model's success in the West becomes impossible to ignore. Every week Germany continues fighting, more people die. Concentration camps continue operating. Model's defence of the West gives them more time. V2 rockets continue falling on London. And Antwerp, German industrial production continues because Model holds the front away from German territory. The Holocaust's final phase, the death marches from camps as Allied forces approach, happens because Germany maintains organised military resistance long enough to evacuate camps. Model's defensive competence in France and Belgium during August and September 1944 directly enables these atrocities by preventing immediate German collapse. He doesn't order any atrocities. He doesn't supervise camps or rocket production. But his military success provides the time and space for them to continue. The connection between tactical excellence and strategic evil becomes undeniable. Model's correspondence from this period reveals a man focused entirely on military problems while compartmentalizing everything else. In a September 19th letter to his wife, he writes. The situation in the West has stabilized. We've established defensive positions that should hold through winter. The men are exhausted but maintain discipline. If we receive adequate reinforcements, we can conduct effective defense indefinitely. There's no mention of Germany's strategic situation, which is hopeless. No acknowledgement that effective defense indefinitely means prolonging a lost war. No engagement with the moral consequences of his effectiveness. Model has reduced everything to a military equation: maintain defensive positions, preserve combat power, inflict maximum casualties on the enemy. The human cost of that equation, the deaths enabled by each additional month of resistance, doesn't appear in his calculations. Or if it does, he's convinced himself that his duty is purely military and those costs are someone else's responsibility. By late September 1944, Model commands Army Group B, responsible for defending the Netherlands and northwestern Germany. He's rebuilt a defensive line that shouldn't exist, stabilized the theatre that was collapsing, and demonstrated once again that he's the Wehrmacht's most valuable field commander. Hitler's trust in him increases further. Model receives resources and authority other commanders don't. But he's also trapped. His very competence chains him to impossible missions. He's too valuable to relieve, too competent to fail dramatically enough to be dismissed. So he continues, applying his defensive genius to a losing war, extending the timeline of Germany's defeat, increasing the total suffering that defeat will ultimately entail. The professor has arrived in the West and immediately proven his methods work here too. That proof is simultaneously his greatest professional achievement and his most damning moral failure. The Western Front will not collapse in 1944, largely because Walter Model prevents it, and hundreds of thousands will die on all sides because of that prevention. September 8th, 1944, a forward command post near Aachen, American artillery, pounds German positions 3 kilometers away, the sound constant like distant thunder. Walter Model stands outside the bunker, binoculars raised, studying the American lines. A captain approaches nervously. "General, you should come inside. American counter-battery fire." Model doesn't lower the binoculars. They're positioning artillery for an attack on the city. "I need to see their pattern." The captain persists. "Sir, your life is..." Model interrupts. "My life is irrelevant. Understanding how they'll attack is essential. Now be quiet or leave." The captain stays quiet. Model watches for another 10 minutes, then returns to the bunker and begins issuing orders. He's identified where the American attack will come, how strong it will be, and where to position German counterattack forces. 2 days later, when the American attack begins, exactly as Model predicted, German forces are waiting. The attack is repulsed with heavy casualties. It's a small tactical victory, but it's representative of how Model is transforming the Western Front from rout to organised defence. The strategic situation facing Model in early September 1944 appears hopeless to most German commanders. Allied forces have liberated France. They're advancing into Belgium and approaching the German border. They possess overwhelming material superiority. Over 2 million troops, thousands of tanks and aircraft, logistics systems that can supply armies hundreds of kilometres from their bases. German forces defending the West number approximately 500,000 troops. Many recently defeated in France, lacking heavy equipment, short on ammunition. The only German advantage is the West Wall, the Siegfried Line, a series of fortifications built in the 1930s along the German border. But fortifications are useless without troops to man them, and troops are useless without organisation, supplies, and leadership. Model's task is to create all three from virtually nothing. He has approximately 3 weeks before Allied forces reach the German border in strength. 3 weeks to transform scattered remnants into an army. Model's first action is organisational ruthlessness. German divisions that escaped France are shattered, many under strength by 70 or 80%. Traditional military doctrine says reconstitute these divisions, bring them to full strength through reinforcements, maintain divisional identity and tradition. Model has no time for tradition. He combines 3 understrength divisions into 1 composite division, pools their remaining equipment, consolidates their officer corps. A division that nominally has 12,000 men but actually has 4,000 gets merged with 2 other divisions in similar condition, creating 1 division of 12,000 actual soldiers rather than 3 divisions of 4,000. Senior officers complain about losing their commands, divisional histories being erased. Model is unmoved. I need combat power, not heraldry. You'll command what exists, not what existed. Within 2 weeks, he's reduced 60 divisions to 40, but increased actual combat strength because every division is now properly manned and equipped for its size. The second element is improvisation. Model scours rear areas for any units that can be pressed into combat service. Luftwaffe ground crews, whose aircraft have been destroyed, become infantry. Construction battalions become fortress troops. Training units are stripped of their cadres and sent to the front. Even naval personnel from submarines that can no longer operate are formed into naval infantry battalions. A German soldier from a former Luftwaffe unit writes home in September. 3 weeks ago, I was maintaining aircraft engines. Yesterday, I was handed a rifle and assigned to defend a bunker on the west wall. They gave us 2 days of infantry training. Now, we're in the line facing American armor. The general says, everyone fights, or Germany dies. He's probably right about both. Model is creating divisions from Clarks and Cooks, but he's creating them and in defensive positions behind fortifications. Even Clarks and Cooks can slow an enemy advance. September 15th through 25th, Allied forces test the reconstituted German defences. American forces attack at multiple points along the front, probing for weaknesses. British forces attempt to outflank German positions in the north. Canadian forces clear the Channel coast, capturing ports. Each attack encounters stiffer resistance than Allied commanders expected. German artillery, which should have been destroyed in France, fires from prepared positions. German infantry, which should be demoralised and combat ineffective, fights from fortified bunkers with interlocking fields of fire. Allied advances slow from 30 to 40 kilometres per day, achieved during the pursuit across France, to 3 to 5 kilometres per day gained through costly attacks. American commanders express frustration in their reports. Enemy resistance has solidified. Previous pursuit operations have transitioned to deliberate attacks against prepared positions. Casualty rates have increased substantially. Model's defensive system in the West incorporates lessons from his Eastern Front experience, but adapts them to Allied capabilities. Against Soviet forces, Model relied heavily on mobile counterattacks, using Panzer and Panzer Grenadier divisions to hit Soviet penetrations from the flanks. Against Western allies, this doesn't work as well. Allied fighter bombers make daylight movement suicidal. Allied artillery and tank gunnery are devastatingly accurate. German mobile reserves attempting counterattacks often get destroyed before reaching their objectives. Model adapts. Instead of mobile counterattacks, he emphasizes defense in depth. The West Wall's fortifications provide the front line. Behind them, 2 to 3 kilometers back, Model positions mobile reserves in covered positions, forests and villages, where Allied air power can't easily spot them. When Allied forces break through the West Wall at a point, German reserves counterattack at night or in bad weather when Allied air power is grounded. It's not as elegant as his Eastern Front system, but it works given Allied strengths. October 1944 brings Model's first major defensive success in the West. American forces attack toward Aachen, the first major German city in the Allied path. Hitler orders Aachen held at all costs for political reasons. It's an historic German city. Its fall would be propaganda disaster. Model doesn't argue about holding Aachen. He agrees it should be defended, but he places the real defensive line behind the city. German forces in Aachen conduct stubborn house-to-house defense, delaying American forces for 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Model positions his strongest units behind Aachen, preparing to counterattack any American breakthrough. When Aachen finally falls on October 21st, American forces have suffered 8,000 casualties, taking one city. They advance beyond Aachen and encounter Model's prepared defensive positions. The offensive bogs down. An American regimental commander reports, "We took Aachen, but the Germans are still there. Every village beyond Aachen is fortified. Every forest contains prepared positions. We're advancing, but at a cost that makes tactical success feel like strategic failure. The human cost of Model's successful defense becomes visible in casualty statistics." Between September 1st and November 30th, 1944, American and British forces attacking into Germany and the Low Countries suffer approximately 160,000 casualties. German forces defending suffer approximately 140,000 casualties. For the first time since Normandy, casualty exchange ratios slightly favour Germany. Allied forces are attacking prepared defences, taking heavy casualties for limited gains. German forces are defending from fortifications, using their positional advantage to offset Allied material superiority. Model has transformed the Western Front from pursuit to attrition, from mobile warfare to siege warfare. Allied commanders, who expected to be in Germany's heartland by October, find themselves fighting for every kilometre. The war that should have ended in 1944 will continue into 1945. Model's defensive genius has bought Germany months of additional time. But Model is running out of resources to work his magic. He's consolidated every available unit. He's scraped together reserves from every rear area organisation. He's positioned forces optimally, using terrain and fortifications to maximum advantage. And still the Allies keep coming. Fresh American divisions arrive from the United States. British forces, reinforced and re-equipped. Resume attacks. Allied logistics, temporarily stretched during the pursuit across France, have caught up. By November, Allied forces have unlimited ammunition, fuel, and replacements. Model has none of these. Every German casualty is nearly impossible to replace. Every expended artillery shell represents one less shell in magazines that cannot be refilled. Every destroyed tank is a permanent loss because German industry cannot replace losses quickly enough. Model is conducting brilliant defense with a wasting asset. Each defensive success consumes German combat power that cannot be regenerated. The mathematics are inexorable. Germany is losing through attrition, even when winning tactically. Model's staff officers begin questioning whether continued resistance serves any purpose. A November conversation, recorded by Model's aide, reveals the command climate. A colonel asks, "General, we've stabilised the front. We've prevented Allied breakthrough, but we cannot win this war. Is there value in prolonging it?" Model's response is telling. We are soldiers. Our duty is to defend Germany. Whether the war can be won is a political question. I don't answer political questions. I answer military questions. Can we hold this position? Can we preserve our forces? Can we delay the enemy? Those questions have military answers, and I provide them. The political decisions are above my level. The colonel presses, "But General, every day we fight, more soldiers die." Model looks up from his maps. "Every day we don't fight." Germany is immediately occupied and millions of Germans fall under enemy control. I'm buying time. What Germany does with that time isn't my responsibility. It's Model's characteristic compartmentalization, the military problem separated from political and moral contexts. He's solving the equation he's given without questioning the equation itself. By December 1944, Model has accomplished what seemed impossible in August. The Western Front is stable. Allied forces are attacking but not breaking through. German defences are holding despite massive material disadvantage. Model has transformed shattered remnants into functioning armies, created defensive lines from ruins, and frustrated Allied hopes for quick victory. His reward is Hitler's continued trust and increasingly impossible missions. In early December, Hitler summons Model to discuss a new operation, not defensive but offensive. Model listens to Hitler's plan and recognizes immediately that it's fantastical, requiring resources Germany doesn't have. Assuming Allied responses that won't happen, projecting successes that mathematics says are impossible. But Hitler is insistent. The offensive will proceed. Model, the defensive genius, is about to be ordered to attack. And despite his certainty that the offensive will fail, despite his knowledge that Germany should be defending rather than attacking, despite every professional instinct screaming that this is wrong, Model will comply. Because that's what he does. He follows orders, solves military problems, and avoids political or moral questions. The consequences of that approach are about to reach their most destructive extreme. The professor is about to participate in Germany's last gamble, a gamble he knows will fail. Continuing with remaining chapters, September 17th, 1944, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Walter Model sits in his headquarters at the Tafelberg Hotel in Oosterbeek, Netherlands, working through logistics reports. Outside, the sound of aircraft engines builds to a roar. Model steps to the window. The sky is full of transport planes and gliders, hundreds of them. British and Polish paratroopers are descending literally on top of his headquarters. Staff officers burst into the room. "General, British airborne are landing 2 kilometers away." Model's response is instant and characteristic. Collect all documents, evacuate in 5 minutes. He grabs his maps and charts, throws them in his staff car, and leaves the Tafelberg as British. Troops are landing in the gardens. The car races east, through Arnhem. British paratroopers are securing the town's western approaches. Model's car exits heading east just as British troops are entering from the west. He's escaped capture by approximately 15 minutes. But Model isn't thinking about his near capture. He's already analysing what this airborne assault means and how to defeat it. The Operation Market Garden plan is among the war's most ambitious Allied operations. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery has convinced Allied Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower to authorise a thrust through the Netherlands into Germany's industrial Ruhr region. The plan: airborne forces will seize bridges at Eindhoven, Nijmegen and Arnhem, creating a corridor through which British XXX Corps, led by Armour, will advance rapidly to the Rhine and across it. Success would place Allied forces behind Germany's West Wall fortifications, open the path to Germany's industrial heartland, and potentially end the war by Christmas. Montgomery commits 3 airborne divisions, 35,000 men, plus XXX Corps with additional 50,000 troops. It's a massive gamble. Model, within 3 hours of the operation's start, understands exactly what the Allies are attempting. And he knows they've made a critical mistake. They've landed airborne forces too far from the bridges, giving German forces time to respond. Model's headquarters evacuates to Terborg, 15 kilometers east of Arnhem. Within 2 hours of arrival, he's on the telephone to every German unit in the Netherlands. What he learns is simultaneously alarming and opportunistic. Alarming: British paratroopers are attempting to seize the Arnhem Bridge. If they succeed and XXX Corps reaches Arnhem, the entire German position in the Netherlands becomes untenable. Opportunistic: 2 SS Panzer divisions, the 9th and 10th, are near Arnhem, supposedly refitting, and well below combat strength. But they exist, they have tanks, and experienced troops. Model's advantage is that Allied intelligence apparently doesn't know these divisions are there, or underestimates their capabilities. Model immediately orders both divisions to counterattack toward Arnhem. Simultaneously, he orders every available unit between Eindhoven and Arnhem to block the road along which XXX Corps must advance. Within 6 hours of the operation starting, Model has organised German response. It's his greatest talent. Reacting instantly to crisis, identifying the enemy's plan, concentrating forces at critical points. The Allied gamble has met the Wehrmacht's best crisis manager. September 17th through 19th, the battle develops exactly as Model predicts and plans. British paratroopers of the 1st Airborne Division land northwest of Arnhem, then attempt to march into the city and seize the road bridge. Most units are blocked by rapidly assembled German resistance. Only one battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, reaches the bridge's northern end and establishes a perimeter. It's a remarkable achievement, but it's insufficient. Frost's force numbers only 600 men. Model immediately recognises they're isolated. Rather than attacking them directly, he orders German forces to contain Frost's battalion at the bridge while blocking other British units from reaching it. The 9th and 10th SS Panzer divisions, though under strength, provide the armoured power to accomplish both missions. By September 19th, Frost's battalion is surrounded at the bridge. The rest of 1st Airborne Division is trapped in a shrinking perimeter west of Arnhem, and XXX Corps, advancing from the south, is encountering far heavier resistance than expected along the road to Arnhem. Model's defensive system in Operation Market Garden demonstrates his tactical flexibility. He's fighting on terrain he barely knows, against forces appearing literally from the sky, with units that are under strength and supposed to be resting. Yet within hours, he's organised coherent defence. How? First, he identifies the critical point, the Arnhem Bridge. Whoever holds it controls access to the Rhine. Model concentrates his available armor there. Second, he recognizes the Allied vulnerability. XXX Corps must advance along a single highway, elevated above surrounding terrain. That highway becomes a kill zone. Model positions anti-tank guns, infantry, and artillery to hit XXX Corps from the flanks as it advances. Third, he uses interior lines. German forces can move from point to point more quickly than separated Allied forces can coordinate. Model shifts reserves rapidly between threatened sectors, appearing strongest wherever the Allies attack. It's a masterclass in defensive operations with limited resources. September 20th through 22nd, the battle reaches its crisis for the Allies. Frost's battalion at the Arnhem Bridge, out of ammunition and overwhelmed by German armour, surrenders on September 21st after holding for 4 days. The rest of 1st Airborne Division is trapped in a pocket at Oosterbeek, subjected to continuous German attack. XXX Corps has advanced to Nijmegen, seizing that bridge on September 20th, but cannot break through to Arnhem. German defences along the highway are too strong. Model personally directs the defence, moving between command posts, ordering counterattacks, concentrating forces. A British officer captured at Arnhem later reports, "We were told German forces in the area were weak and demoralised. Instead, we faced coordinated counterattacks by armour and infantry. Someone competent was commanding them. You could tell from how quickly they responded to our movements. That someone is Model, applying skills honed on the Eastern Front to destroy Montgomery's ambitious operation. September 25th marks Market Garden's official end. British and Polish forces trapped at Oosterbeek attempt evacuation across the Rhine. Of the approximately 10,000 men trapped in the pocket, 2,400 escape, the rest killed or captured. 1st Airborne Division ceases to exist as an effective formation. British casualties total over 8,000 killed, wounded, or captured. Polish casualties add another 1,500. German casualties are substantial, approximately 3,300, but Germany retains control of the Arnhem Bridge and the Lower Rhine. The Allied thrust into Germany has been stopped. Montgomery's promise of ending the war by Christmas is revealed as over-optimism. Model has achieved his most celebrated defensive victory in the West, destroying an Allied airborne corps and halting the Allied advance toward the Ruhr. The Market Garden victory establishes Model's reputation among Allied commanders as their most dangerous opponent. British intelligence assessments from October 1944 describe him as highly competent defensive commander whose arrival in any sector indicates German High Command considers that sector critical. American intelligence reports note, Model's tactical responses at Arnhem demonstrated flexibility and aggressive use of limited resources. Allied operations in his sector should anticipate strong, coordinated resistance. The Allies have learned that Model's reputation is earned. They've also learned, painfully, that German forces, even when supposedly weakened and demoralised, remain formidable when competently commanded. Model has reminded the Allies that reaching the Rhine will require months of hard fighting, not weeks of rapid advance. But the victory's strategic significance is limited. Market Garden's failure delays Allied invasion of Germany but doesn't prevent it. By October 1944, Allied forces are still advancing, albeit more slowly. Allied material superiority remains overwhelming. More American divisions arrive monthly. German forces have no strategic reserve. Model has won a tactical victory, but Germany's strategic situation continues deteriorating. Every defensive success consumes German combat power. Model is trading German lives for time, approximately 3,300 casualties to inflict 8,500 Allied casualties and delay Allied advance by perhaps 6 weeks. The mathematics favour Germany in this transaction, but only tactically. Strategically, Germany cannot afford any casualties because replacements don't exist. The Allies can replace losses. Germany cannot. Model is conducting brilliant defence in service of inevitable defeat. Model's own assessment of Market Garden, recorded in a September 27th report to Hitler, reveals his limited understanding of the operation's strategic meaning. The British airborne assault on Arnhem has been defeated. Enemy forces suffered heavy casualties and failed to secure the Rhine crossing. Army Group B defensive positions remain intact. We have demonstrated that Allied airborne operations can be defeated. through rapid, aggressive response. The report focuses entirely on tactical success while ignoring strategic reality. Model has proven German forces can still win battles. He hasn't addressed whether winning battles matters when Germany is losing the war. The compartmentalization continues. Military problems receive military solutions. Political and strategic questions remain unexamined. Model is Germany's finest defensive tactician, conducting masterful operations that prolong but cannot prevent defeat. Market Garden is simultaneously his greatest achievement and his greatest tragedy, proof that his genius still functions and that his genius serves no larger purpose except delaying the inevitable. By October 1944, Model commands respect from enemies and allies alike. Soldiers trust him to keep them alive. Hitler trusts him to hold critical positions. Allies respect his tactical skill. But trust, respect, and skill cannot overcome mathematics. Germany is outnumbered, outproduced, and out of options. Model's defensive victories buy time. Time for what? More Germans to die, more cities to be destroyed, more civilians to suffer. The equation solves itself in suffering. Model doesn't calculate that variable. He calculates casualty exchange ratios, defensive positions, supply requirements. The human meaning of those calculations, the suffering produced by his competent service, remains outside his professional framework. The professor has won his most celebrated battle. The price of that victory, measured in extended war and prolonged suffering, doesn't appear on his battlefield maps. It should. November 3rd, 1944. Walter Model enters the Führer's bunker at Wolfschanze, summoned for a top-secret briefing. Hitler, looking older and more ill than Model remembers, spreads maps across the conference table. I'm showing you this before even the High Command knows. Hitler begins. We will attack in the west, through the Ardennes, to Antwerp. Model looks at the maps, his face carefully neutral. Hitler continues for 30 minutes, outlining what he calls Operation Wacht am Rhein. Watch on the Rhine. 200,000 troops, 500 tanks, will attack through the weakly held Ardennes sector, cross the Meuse River, drive to Antwerp, split the Allied armies, encircle British forces in the north. Hitler's voice rises as he describes the operation's glorious conclusion. Allied forces destroyed. Anglo-American alliance shattered. Germany achieving favourable peace in the west before resuming full focus on the Eastern Front. Model listens to this fantasy with growing horror. When Hitler finishes, Model asks permission to study the plan and respond in 24 hours. Permission granted. Model returns to his headquarters and assembles his staff for private analysis. They work through the night, calculating requirements, projecting outcomes, identifying problems. By morning, Model has compiled a detailed assessment. The analysis is devastating. Operation Wacht am Rhein requires 330 kilometers advance to reach Antwerp. German forces must cross difficult terrain, including the Ardennes forests and multiple river barriers. They must do this in winter weather that will limit mobility. Most critically, the operation requires 5 million gallons of fuel, but Germany has only half that amount available, and the plan assumes capturing Allied fuel depots to continue the advance. Model's conclusion. This operation will fail because we cannot supply it. Even if initial attacks succeed, we'll run out of fuel and ammunition before reaching the Meuse, much less Antwerp. We'll have expended our last mobile reserves on an operation that achieves nothing strategically significant. He writes this assessment in a formal report, then adds a section proposing an alternative, the small solution. A limited offensive with realistic objectives. Destroy Allied forces east of the Meuse. Shorten German defensive lines, create a more sustainable front. Model's small solution requires 60 kilometers advance instead of 330, 1/5 the fuel, and has objectives that might actually be achieved. November 5th, Model presents both plans to Hitler. He begins diplomatically. Mein Führer, your concept is operationally brilliant. However, resource constraints require us to consider a modified version with limited objectives. He presents the small solution, explaining how it achieves meaningful results with available resources. Hitler listens, then rejects the proposal, Limited offensives achieve limited results. Germany needs dramatic victory to change the strategic situation. The full operation will proceed as planned. Model makes one more attempt. Mein Führer, the fuel calculations. Hitler cuts him off. We will capture Allied fuel depots. The operation plan accounts for this. Model recognizes the futility of further argument. Hitler has decided. The operation will proceed, regardless of logistical impossibility. Model salutes and leaves. In the car, back to headquarters, his chief of staff asks what they should do. Model's response: we prepare to execute an operation we know will fail. Then we convert failure into least destructive outcome possible. It's what we do now. Manage defeats. Through November and early December, Model oversees preparations for what he privately calls the desperate gamble. 2 armies, the 6th SS Panzer Army under SS General Sepp Dietrich and the 5th Panzer Army under General Hasse von Manteuffel, concentrate in the Eifel region opposite the Ardennes. Model commands both armies as Army Group B. He brings professional competence to a task he believes is futile. Units receive careful briefings. Supply dumps are established, though with insufficient stocks. Attack routes are reconnoitred. Operational security is maintained excellently. Allied intelligence largely misses the build-up. Model's staff work is flawless, even as Model himself knows the operation is doomed. It's professionalism in service of futility, which describes much of Model's final year. December 16th, 1944, 5:30 in the morning. 2,000 German artillery pieces open fire across a 100-kilometre front in the Ardennes. The offensive Hitler demanded begins. German infantry and armour attack through morning fog and snow, hitting thinly held American positions. Initial success is substantial. American units, surprised by the attack's location and strength, retreat in disorder. German forces advance 10, 15, 20 kilometres in the first day. Hitler is ecstatic. Model is cautious. He's watching fuel consumption rates. By December 17th, the offensive is already falling behind schedule. Not because of American resistance, which is initially weak, but because the terrain slows movement more than planned. Narrow roads through forests create traffic jams. Fuel consumption exceeds projections. Some German units already report fuel shortages. December 18th through 22nd, the offensive reaches its high water mark. German forces advance up to 90 kilometres at the deepest penetration, creating a bulge in American lines, giving the battle its eventual name. But Model's fears are realised. Fuel shortages cripple the advance. Major German units literally run out of gasoline and stop, unable to advance or retreat. American resistance stiffens as reinforcements arrive. Weather clears on December 23rd, allowing Allied air power to hammer German columns. Most critically, German forces failed to capture any significant Allied fuel depots. The assumption underlying the operation's logistics plan proves false. By December 24th, the offensive is stalled. German units have advanced but cannot continue advancing. They hold exposed positions, subject to Allied counterattacks, unable to retreat because Hitler forbids it, and unable to advance because fuel doesn't exist. Model requests permission to withdraw on December 26th, arguing that the offensive has failed and remaining in the bulge exposes German forces to encirclement. Hitler refuses. The offensive will continue. Model knows it won't, can't. He begins preparing unauthorized withdrawals, his standard technique, planning to execute them as tactical adjustments without explicit permission. But before he can implement these plans, Soviet forces launch a massive winter offensive on the Eastern Front, January 12, 1945. Hitler diverts reinforcements intended for the west to the east. The Ardennes offensive is effectively over, though Hitler won't officially terminate it until late January. The final accounting of the Ardennes offensive reveals exactly what Model predicted. Germany expended its last mobile reserves for minimal strategic gain. German casualties total approximately 82,000 killed, wounded, or missing. More importantly, Germany lost approximately 300 tanks and assault guns, losses that cannot be replaced. Fuel expenditure exceeded projections by 30%, consuming stocks needed for defensive operations. In exchange, Germany inflicted approximately 77,000 American casualties, delayed Allied advance by approximately 6 weeks, and achieved no strategic objectives. The Meuse wasn't reached. Antwerp wasn't captured. Allied armies weren't split. Anglo-American alliance wasn't shattered. Model's November assessment proved entirely accurate. The operation failed for exactly the reasons he predicted, but accuracy provides no satisfaction. Model participated in an operation he knew was futile, spent German lives on Hitler's fantasy, and achieved nothing except demonstrating again that he will execute orders even when he knows those orders are wrong. The moral dimension of Model's Ardennes participation is damning. He knew the operation would fail. He told Hitler it would fail. Hitler insisted anyway. And Model executed it professionally and competently, marshalling forces and directing attacks and managing logistics for an offensive he believed was operationally bankrupt. Could Model have refused? Theoretically, yes. Practically, no. Refusing Hitler's direct order would have resulted in his dismissal, and probably worse, given the paranoid atmosphere post-July 20th bomb plot. But executing the order made Model complicit in wasting 82,000 German lives on an operation with no strategic purpose. The calculation he faces, his personal safety versus his soldiers' lives, resolves in favour of his own position and against his men. It's the most morally indefensible decision of his career. Post-war analysis of the Ardennes offensive often focuses on whether different tactics might have succeeded. Model's small solution receives particular attention. Could a limited offensive with realistic objectives have achieved something meaningful? Historians debate this counterfactual, but the debate misses a larger question. Should Germany have conducted any offensive in December 1944? Germany's strategic situation required defence, conserving forces, delaying Allied and Soviet advances as long as possible. Any offensive, even a successful one, consumed German combat power that couldn't be replaced. Model understood this. His November assessment acknowledged that even his small solution was a gamble. The correct course was to conduct aggressive defence, using Germany's remaining strength to exact maximum Allied casualties while preserving German forces. Instead, Hitler gambled and Model enabled the gamble. The result? German forces weaker, Allied forces delayed slightly, strategic situation unchanged except worse for Germany. By January 1945, Model commands forces retreating from the Bulge, attempting to re-establish defensive lines, short on everything except desperation. He's just participated in Germany's last offensive, an operation he knew was doomed from planning stages. The experience should have taught him that executing impossible orders produces only suffering. It doesn't teach him this. Or if it does, the lesson doesn't change his behaviour. Model continues serving, continues executing orders, continues applying professional competence to military impossible situations. The professor has become the enabler, the general whose skills prolong the agony. The Ardennes offensive is Model's lowest point, not because he performed badly. His generalship during the offensive was typically competent, but because he performed at all. Competent execution of futile orders is worse than refusing those orders. Model chose competence. German soldiers, 82,000 of them, paid the price. March 28th, 1945. Walter Model stands at a map table in his Army Group B headquarters, now located in a bunker complex near Siegen. Red markers, indicating American positions, nearly surround his entire command. Staff officers watch silently as Model traces the American pincer movements with his finger. Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges' 1st Army advancing from the south. Lieutenant General William Simpson's 9th Army sweeping from the north. The two American armies are about to link up near Paderborn, completing an encirclement of the Ruhr industrial region. Inside that encirclement, Army Group B, approximately 325,000 German troops, possibly 400,000 counting support personnel. Model looks up from the map. His expression, usually confident or at least determined, appears resigned. Gentlemen, we are about to be encircled. The question is what we do about it. A colonel suggests breakout attempts. Model shakes his head. American air power will destroy any large formation attempting to move in daylight, and we lack the fuel for large-scale movement. Another officer mentions Hitler's inevitable order to hold. Model's response: Hitler will order us to hold the Ruhr's industries. We'll receive fortress designation. Führer orders will forbid breakout or surrender. He pauses. Those orders will be militarily irrelevant, because breakout is impossible, and defending the Ruhr serves no strategic purpose. We're trapped. It's perhaps the most honest assessment Model has made in months. His defensive genius has met an unsolvable problem: encirclement with insufficient resources to break out and no military reason to hold. April 1st, 1945. The pocket is closed. American forces have linked up, completing the ring around the Ruhr. Inside the pocket, Army Group B occupies a space roughly 100 kilometers east-west, 70 kilometers north-south, containing Germany's industrial heartland: coal mines, steel plants, chemical works, all the machinery of total war. Hitler immediately issues the expected order: Army Group B will hold the Ruhr, fortified region, tying down maximum American forces, supporting continued resistance. The order is, as Model predicted, militarily meaningless. The Ruhr's industries have largely ceased functioning, destroyed by previous Allied bombing or lacking raw materials. Holding the industries doesn't preserve them for German use because they can't operate. Tying down American forces is pointless because the Americans have unlimited reinforcements. Model reads the Führer order and files it. He won't follow it, but neither will he explicitly disobey it. Instead, he'll do what he's always done: interpret orders to suit battlefield reality. April 2nd through 10th, American forces compress the pocket. They're not in a hurry. Rushing in would cost casualties. Instead, they systematically advance, using artillery and air power to destroy German positions before infantry moves forward. German forces resist, but without cohesion. Divisions that numbered 10,000 men now number 3,000. Ammunition is rationed, artillery reduced to a few shells per gun per day. Fuel is nearly non-existent. Tanks and vehicles sit immobile, becoming stationary pillboxes. Food supplies dwindle. Civilian population inside the pocket also faces starvation. Model moves his headquarters repeatedly as American forces advance, staying ahead of the collapse, but not by much. His staff officers notice changes in the general. He's always been intense, driven, focused. Now he seems distant, distracted. He still issues orders, but with less conviction. He still visits forward positions, but mechanically without his previous intensity. Something has broken inside Walter Model. April 15th, Model holds a conference with his senior commanders. The topic: what to do when the end comes. Some officers argue for final stand, going down fighting. Others suggest attempting breakout in small groups. A few quietly suggest surrender might save lives. Model listens without comment until all have spoken. Then he delivers his assessment. A final stand achieves nothing except additional casualties. The war is lost. Germany will be occupied regardless of whether we resist here or not. Breakout attempts will mostly fail and get men killed. Mass surrender violates our oaths as German officers. He pauses, looking around the room. Here is what we will do. Combat will continue as long as ammunition lasts. When ammunition runs out, units will cease fighting. Officers will decide individually whether to surrender or attempt to escape. I will not order mass surrender because I cannot order men to violate their oaths. I will not order continued resistance because I cannot order men to die for nothing. It's Model's final order to Army Group B. Fight until you can't, then save yourselves. The order is simultaneously humane, pragmatic, and completely contrary to Hitler's directive. Model's thinking during these final days reveals itself in fragments of conversation recorded by staff officers. To his operations officer, April 14th, we've lost the war. That's clear. The question now is how many more must die before it officially ends. To his chief of staff, April 16th. I've spent this entire war trying to preserve German soldiers' lives. Now I'm trapped with 300,000 men who I cannot save. It's the final proof of futility. To his aide, April 17th. After receiving another bombastic order from Hitler, the Führer lives in fantasy. We live in reality. Reality has won. Model is confronting something he's avoided his entire career: the political and moral dimensions of his military service. For 3 years, he solved military problems without questioning the political system those problems served. Now, in the Pocket's final days, the separation between military professionalism and political reality has collapsed. Model cannot avoid recognizing that his competence has served evil, that his defensive genius has prolonged criminal regime, that every soldier he saved to fight another day simply died later for nothing. April 18th through 21st, the Pocket's final collapse. American forces have divided Army Group B into several smaller pockets. German units, out of ammunition and food, surrender in groups ranging from platoons to divisions. By April 21st, organized resistance has ended. Approximately 325,000 German soldiers are captured, the largest German surrender in the West, exceeding even the Falaise pocket. Model's staff urges him to escape, to attempt infiltration through American lines. Model refuses. Where would I go? To continue a war that's over? To be captured later rather than now? An aide suggests surrender. Model's response is sharp. I will not surrender. I've never surrendered. I won't start now. Staff officers don't fully understand what Model means until the next day. April 21st. Late morning. Model tells his remaining staff officers they're released from duty, free to surrender or escape as they choose. Most choose surrender. The war is obviously over. Fighting on makes no sense. Model keeps only his aide and driver. He orders them to prepare a car. When asked destination, Model responds, just drive east, away from American forces. The car drives for approximately 2 hours through a landscape of destroyed German units, abandoned equipment, and surrendering soldiers. Model sits silently in the back seat, looking at the destruction. Finally, he orders the driver to stop near a forest outside Duisburg. He tells his aide and driver to walk away, to surrender to the first American unit they encounter. They hesitate. Model's voice hardens. That's an order. Leave. Now. They walk away, looking back repeatedly. Model enters the forest alone. Approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon, April 21st, 1945, a single gunshot sounds from the forest. Model's aide and driver, now several hundred meters away, hear it. They know immediately what it means. They return to the forest and find Walter Model dead, a single gunshot wound to his temple, his service pistol in his hand. He's wearing his Field Marshal's uniform, decorations in place. There's no note. His body lies in the undergrowth, already being reclaimed by the forest. The aide and driver bury him in a shallow grave, mark the location on a map, then surrender as ordered. Field Marshal Walter Model, Germany's defensive genius, the Führer's fireman, has solved his final problem. The solution is death. The Ruhr pocket's end represents the complete failure of everything. Model spent his career building. He created defensive systems that preserved German combat power through tactical flexibility. The pocket's encirclement made flexibility impossible. He specialized in elastic defense that traded space for time. In the pocket, there was no space to trade. He maintained morale through competent leadership that kept soldiers alive in the pocket. His leadership couldn't prevent inevitable capture or death. Model's entire military philosophy, his engineering approach to war, his calculated casualty ratios, his mathematical solutions to tactical problems, all proved useless in the pocket. You cannot engineer your way out of strategic impossibility. Model's suicide acknowledges this. He's run out of solutions. The equation no longer solves. The only remaining choice is to exit the equation entirely. But Model's death also represents moral evasion. He kills himself rather than face trial for his service to Nazi Germany. He avoids being questioned about his knowledge of war crimes, his role in prolonging the war, his responsibility for deaths, his defensive competence enabled. Post-war trials would have examined Model's career, judging whether professional military service to criminal regime constitutes criminal complicity. Model never faces that examination. His suicide, intentionally or not, prevents accountability. Whether Model killed himself to avoid capture's dishonor, as he believed, or to avoid answering uncomfortable questions about his service, remains unknowable. Perhaps both motivated him, perhaps neither. The only certainty is that Walter Model, who spent his career solving impossible military problems, solved his final impossible problem with a bullet. The professor has calculated his last equation. The answer is oblivion. April 10th, 1945, the Ruhr pocket. Walter Model walks alone through a forest near his headquarters, a rare moment away from staff officers and tactical decisions. An aide, watching from distance, later reports that Model was talking to himself, gesturing at no one. What Model was thinking during those walks remains unknown. He left no diary of his final weeks, but his recorded conversations from early April reveal a man confronting questions he's avoided his entire career. To his Chief of Staff, April 8th, "We've prolonged this war beyond any military logic. The question I cannot answer is whether prolonging it was duty or crime." To his Operations Officer, April 9th, "I saved 300,000 men at Army Group North. They survived to fight again, which means they survived to suffer more battles, take more casualties, inflict more casualties. Did I save them or delay their deaths while increasing total suffering?" Model is performing calculations he's never attempted before, moral calculations. And discovering that his engineering approach to war, which worked brilliantly for tactical problems, provides no framework for ethical ones. The moral accounting of Model's career, which he's finally attempting in the pocket's final days, requires confronting several uncomfortable facts. First, Model's defensive genius extended World War II in Europe by an estimated 6 to 9 months, according to post-war analysis by Allied intelligence. From his stabilization of Army Group Center after Bagration in summer 1944 through his defense in the West through winter 1944 to 45, Model's commands consistently delayed Allied and Soviet advances beyond what other commanders achieved. 6 to 9 months of additional war. What happens in 6 to 9 months of total war? Conservative estimates, approximately 1 million additional military casualties on all sides. Several 100,000 additional civilian deaths from combat operations, strategic bombing, starvation, and disease. Continued operation of concentration camps for 6 to 9 additional months, meaning tens of thousands of additional Holocaust victims. Model didn't run concentration camps. He didn't order civilian massacres. He didn't personally kill anyone beyond what battlefield command entails. But his competence, his defensive skill, his ability to stabilize collapsing fronts and preserve German combat power gave Nazi Germany 6 to 9 additional months of existence. The deaths that occurred during those months are not solely his responsibility, but they are partially his consequence. Second uncomfortable fact. Model knew Germany was losing. His private statements from 1944 onward acknowledge this repeatedly. Letter to his wife, February 1944. "The strategic situation is hopeless. We cannot win this war." Comment to staff officers, July 1944. "We're managing Germany's defeat, not preventing it." Statement to operations officer, October 1944. "Every defensive success buys time. I don't know what Germany does with that time, but buying it is my mission." Model understood he was prolonging inevitable defeat. He chose to prolong it anyway, framing his choice as military duty. But knowing you're fighting for a lost cause changes the moral calculus. Soldiers fighting for victory serve national defense. Soldiers fighting for delay serve political leadership's desire to postpone reckoning. Model, in his final weeks, seems to be questioning whether the latter is legitimate military duty or complicity in political criminality. Third uncomfortable fact, Model benefited personally from Nazi regime. He joined the party in 1933. His career accelerated under National Socialism. He received honours, estates, and financial rewards from Hitler personally. Model wasn't a resistor or reluctant servant. He was an early joiner and enthusiastic beneficiary. This doesn't mean he was ideologically committed. Evidence suggests Model's politics were opportunistic rather than fanatical. But opportunistic service to criminal regime, service motivated by career advancement rather than belief, might be morally worse than fanatical service. The true believer acts from conviction, however misguided. The opportunist acts from self-interest, using regime criminality as ladder for personal success. Model's career trajectory fits the opportunist pattern. He rose because the Nazi regime valued his competence and political reliability. He provided both gaining rank and authority. The transaction benefited both parties. Hitler got a competent general, Model got command and prestige. German soldiers and occupied populations paid the price. Model's knowledge of Nazi war crimes and atrocities remains partially unclear, though some facts are documented. He commanded on the Eastern Front, where Wehrmacht forces participated in partisan reprisals that violated laws of war. Evidence suggests Model knew about and tacitly approved harsh anti-partisan measures, including collective punishment of villagers and summary executions. He commanded Army Group Center during a period when Einsatzgruppen, SS death squads, operated in the same territory, murdering Jews and other targeted populations. Whether Model knew details of Einsatzgruppen operations is disputed. That he knew something irregular was happening to Jewish populations in occupied territory seems certain. German officers at his level received at least general information about special security operations. Model's response to this knowledge, assuming he had it, appears to have been compartmentalization. Not my responsibility, that's SS business. I focus on military operations. This compartmentalization allowed Model to function without confronting his position within a criminal system. But it's moral evasion, not moral innocence. The alternative Model faced, had he chosen differently, illuminates his moral culpability. What if Model had joined the July 20th, 1944 conspiracy to assassinate Hitler? The conspiracy failed, leading to execution of hundreds of officers. But it represented the alternative path, using one's position to actively resist the regime rather than competently serve it. Model never considered this path, or if he did, rejected it. What if Model had conducted less competent defense, allowing German positions to collapse more quickly? This seems absurd, asking a professional soldier to deliberately lose. But when the war is already lost and continued fighting prolongs suffering, is professional excellence still professional obligation? Model never grappled with this question publicly. In the pocket in April 1945, perhaps he's grappling with it privately, realizing that his professional excellence was moral failure. A conversation recorded by Model's operations officer, April 12, 1945, reveals Model's final thinking. The officer asks Model directly, "Sir, do you believe our service has been justified?" Model looks at him for a long moment before responding. "Justified by what standard? Military duty? We served competently. Political morality? We served a criminal regime. Historical judgment? That judgment will be harsh, deservedly so. I served because I believed that was my duty. I'm no longer certain that belief was correct, but I cannot go back and choose differently. None of us can." The officer presses, "Will you face trial after the war?" Model's response, "If I survive, yes. I imagine Allied courts will examine my career, my decisions, my knowledge. They'll ask what I knew and when I knew it. They'll ask why I continued serving when the war was lost. I don't have answers that satisfy me, much less that will satisfy judges." It's as close as Model comes to acknowledging guilt. He recognizes his service was problematic, possibly criminal, certainly subject to post-war judgment. His suicide 9 days later suggests that recognition became unbearable. The specific charges Model might have faced at trial remain speculative, but Allied plans for war crimes prosecution provide hints. Model would likely have been charged with waging aggressive war, the standard charge for senior Wehrmacht officers, war crimes related to anti-partisan operations, specifically collective punishments and reprisals that violated Geneva Conventions, possibly crimes against humanity if prosecutors could prove knowledge of Holocaust operations in his command areas. Model's defense would have followed the pattern used by other German generals. He was a professional soldier following orders, conducting legitimate military operations, not involved in political decisions or criminal activities. That defense worked for some German officers and failed for others. Whether it would have worked for Model is unknowable because he never stood trial. His suicide ensured that. But historical judgment proceeds without trial, and historical consensus has reached several conclusions about Walter Model. Military historians acknowledge his tactical brilliance and defensive innovation. His methods influenced Cold War defensive doctrine in both NATO and Warsaw Pact armies. Elastic defense, defense in depth, mobile reserves, counterattacks against enemy penetrations, these concepts that Model perfected remain foundational to modern defensive operations. From purely military technical standpoint, Model was master practitioner. Moral historians reach harsher judgment. Model's competence prolonged criminal regime, his defensive successes enabled continued atrocities, his professional excellence was exercised in service of evil. The combination of high competence and low morality makes Model one of history's most troubling military figures. He wasn't incompetent fool or fanatical ideologue. He was skilled professional who chose, repeatedly, to serve Nazi Germany effectively. That choice, and the consequences that flowed from it, constitute his moral legacy. In the forest near Duisburg, on April 21st, 1945, Model presumably calculated his final moral equation. On one side, military duty, professional competence, oath of loyalty to Germany. On the other side, service to criminal regime, prolonged suffering, partial responsibility for deaths, his defensive skill enabled. Did the equation balance? Could it ever balance? Model's answer was to exit the calculation entirely. His suicide suggests he concluded the equation was unsolvable, that no accounting could justify his career's consequences, that continuing to live meant continuing to face questions he couldn't answer. Whether that interpretation is correct, or Model simply couldn't face capture's dishonor, remains uncertain. What's certain is that Model confronted moral questions in his final weeks that he'd avoided his entire career. The confrontation destroyed him. The professor discovered that some problems cannot be engineered away, that moral accountability cannot be calculated like casualty ratios, that consequences of service cannot be separated from intent of service. The discovery came too late to change his actions, but early enough to recognize their weight. Model died carrying that weight, alone in a forest, solving his final problem with permanent exit. It's a conclusion that resolves nothing except his personal discomfort with irresolvable moral failure. April 21st, 1945, early afternoon. Walter Model stands at the edge of a forest near Duisburg, Germany. Behind him, his staff car idles, his aide and driver waiting inside. Model looks back at them once, then turns toward the trees. He carries his field marshal's baton, symbol of his rank. He wears his decorations, Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, among Germany's highest honours. His service pistol hangs at his belt. He's 54 years old. Though he looks older, the last year has aged him beyond his years. Model pauses at the forest's edge, perhaps considering whether to proceed. Whatever internal debate occurs resolves in favour of the forest. He walks into the trees, alone. The aide and driver wait, watching him disappear into the undergrowth. They know where this walk ends. Everyone knows. Model has been discussing death for days, not explicitly but obliquely, making comments about honour and duty and impossibility of surrender. His staff officers understand the subtext. This walk is Model's final solution to an unsolvable problem. Model's psychology in his final hours can only be inferred from fragmentary evidence and his final statements. To his chief of staff earlier that morning, a field marshal does not surrender. History records no German field marshal who went into captivity. I will not be the first. To his aide, while driving toward the forest. I've fought for Germany for 34 years. I will not end my service in an American prisoner of war camp. To his driver, his last recorded words before entering the forest. Thank you for your service. You're released from duty. Surrender yourselves to the first American unit you encounter. That's an order. These statements reveal Model's framework for his decision. He's not killing himself from despair or fear, at least not consciously. He's killing himself from what he considers honour, the professional soldier's honour code that forbids surrender. Model has internalized Prussian military traditions so completely that he views surrender as worse than death. This honour code, which seems alien to modern sensibility, was common among senior German officers. Model is applying it to himself with characteristic thoroughness. But Model's honour calculation ignores inconvenient realities. Surrender doesn't mean dishonour when the war is lost and continued fighting serves no purpose. Numerous German generals surrendered in April and May 1945 without losing honour. They recognised military reality and chose to preserve their lives and their soldiers' lives. Model's honour code is selective tradition, emphasising one aspect: Prussian officer never surrenders, while ignoring another aspect: Prussian officer serves state and people, not personal prestige. If serving Germany means preserving German lives by ending futile resistance, surrender is honourable. Model never makes this calculation, or makes it and rejects it. His honour is personal, tied to his self-image as never defeated defensive commander, rather than practical, tied to what serves Germany best. This is vanity disguised as honour. Alternative interpretations of Model's suicide suggest less noble motivations. Model might be avoiding war crimes trial. Allied powers had announced intention to prosecute senior German military leaders for waging aggressive war and for war crimes. Model's service on the Eastern Front, his command during period of anti-partisan operations, his proximity to Holocaust operations in his command areas all made him potential prosecution target. Conviction could mean execution or lengthy imprisonment. Suicide avoids that possibility, taking control of his fate rather than submitting to Allied judgment. This interpretation suggests Model's suicide is escape rather than honour, avoiding accountability rather than accepting consequences of service. The truth likely combines multiple motivations: honour code, fear of trial, despair at Germany's complete defeat, recognition that his life's work has failed. Model probably experienced all these simultaneously, but the result is the same: death as solution to multiple unsolvable problems. Model's final walk lasts approximately 15 minutes, estimated from when he enters the forest until his aide and driver hear the gunshot. What he thinks during those 15 minutes remains unknown. Does he review his career, calculating whether his service was justified? Does he think about his family, his wife and children whom he hasn't seen in weeks? Does he consider the soldiers he commanded, the hundreds of thousands whose lives his decisions affected? Or does he think nothing beyond mechanical steps toward execution of final decision? Walk far enough that the body won't be immediately found, find a secluded spot, draw the pistol, end it. The forest keeps Model's final thoughts. What emerges from the forest, approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon, is a single gunshot, sharp crack echoing through the trees. Then, silence. Field Marshal Walter Model is dead. His aide and driver return to the forest, following the sound. They find Model approximately 200 metres from the road, lying in the undergrowth. Single gunshot wound to the right temple, death instantaneous. His face is calm, no indication of struggle or hesitation. The pistol lies near his right hand. Everything suggests Model walked to this spot, drew his weapon, placed it against his temple, and fired without hesitation. It's consistent with his personality: decisive, efficient, thorough. Even in suicide, Model executes the task professionally. His aide and driver, now crying, understand that burying their commander is their final duty. They dig a shallow grave with their hands and an entrenching tool from the car. They place Model's body in the grave, oriented east-west according to military tradition. They note landmarks, draw a map showing the grave's location. Then they follow Model's final order. They walk west until they encounter American soldiers to whom they surrender. Model's burial remains secret initially. His aide and driver, in American captivity, mentioned to German-speaking interrogators that they buried a senior officer. They don't initially reveal it was Model, fearing the Americans might exhume and desecrate the body. Only weeks later, as the war ends and passions cool, do they provide specific information. Field Marshal Model is buried near Duisburg, location marked on this map. American authorities don't immediately investigate. They have millions of German soldiers to process. One more buried officer isn't priority. Model's grave remains undisturbed through 1945 and into the 1950s. His family knows he's dead, but not where he's buried. German veterans who served under Model speculate about his fate. Some believe he's in American custody under false identity. Others believe the suicide reports are true. Certainty doesn't arrive until 1955. Summer 1955, West German government undertakes effort to locate and identify German soldiers buried in unmarked graves. Model's aide, now living in West Germany, provides his map to authorities. Excavation team goes to the forest near Duisburg, to the location marked on a decade-old map. They dig. They find remains consistent with Model's description. Middle-aged man in Field Marshal's uniform with bullet wound to skull. Dental records, though limited, match Model. Family members identify personal items recovered from the grave. Official identification is made. The remains are Walter Model. His body is reburied with military honours at Vossenack War Cemetery in the Hürtgen Forest, final resting place among 3,200 German soldiers who fell in that region. Model's grave marker is simple. Name, rank, dates. No epitaph, no explanation, just facts. It seems appropriate for a man who reduced everything to calculation. Model's suicide's meaning has been debated by historians for decades. Was it honourable or cowardly? Principled or escapist? Germanic military tradition respecting honour or admission of guilt? Arguments exist for all interpretations. Proponents of honour interpretation note that Model acted consistently with stated values. A field marshal doesn't surrender. Death is preferable to captivity. Proponents of escape interpretation note that Model avoided accountability for service to criminal regime. Trial would have examined uncomfortable questions about his knowledge and actions. Synthesis interpretation suggests both factors operated simultaneously. Model's stated reasons were honour-based, but unconscious motivation was avoiding judgment he couldn't face. The truth, as with most human motivation, is probably complex and contradictory. Model likely believed he was acting honourably, while simultaneously being motivated by fear of trial and recognition of guilt. People contain multitudes, especially in extremis. What Model's suicide definitely accomplishes is ending his participation in moral reckoning with Nazi Germany. Wehrmacht generals who survived faced varying fates. Some, like Keitel and Jodl, were tried at Nuremberg and executed. Others, like Manstein and Guderian, were tried by military tribunals and received prison sentences, later shortened. Still others avoided trial entirely through Allied decision that not every German officer was war criminal. Model, through suicide, avoided all possibilities. He wasn't tried, wasn't imprisoned, wasn't forced to publicly account for his service. He exited the historical stage before judgment arrived. Whether this was his intention or merely convenient side effect of honour-motivated suicide remains unclear. Result is same. Model never answered questions about his role, prolonging Nazi Germany, his knowledge of war crimes, his responsibility for deaths, his competence enabled. The questions remain hanging in air above his grave, unanswered and unanswerable because the man who should answer them chose death over dialogue. In the forest, near Duisburg, on April 21st, 1945, Walter Model solved his final equation. The problem: impossible military situation, looming capture, potential war crimes, trial, recognition that his life's work had served evil. The variables: personal honour, professional identity, moral accountability, historical judgment. The solution: death. Its characteristic: Model solution, decisive and thorough. But, unlike his military solutions, which saved soldiers' lives and delayed enemy advances, his final solution saves nothing and delays nothing. It ends only his own discomfort with irresolvable moral failure. The professor's last calculation was entirely selfish. The equation he solved was his own anguish, not anyone else's need. The answer, worked out in forest solitude, with pistol shot, resolved nothing except his personal existence. It's perhaps fitting end for a man whose brilliance was always tactical, focused on immediate problems, never strategic, never moral, never questioning the larger systems his technical solutions served. Model died as he lived, solving problems without asking whether those problems should be solved, applying competence without examining what that competence enables, calculating ratios without questioning the system that makes calculation necessary. The last walk ended where it had to end, in death, because Model had finally confronted questions his engineering mind couldn't calculate away. The only solution he could find was to exit the questions entirely. His death answered nothing except his own need to escape what he'd finally, belatedly, impossibly recognized. That competent service to evil is itself evil, and that no amount of tactical brilliance absolves one of moral responsibility for consequences of that service. In the forest, Model accepted that conclusion and rejected continuing to live with it. The walk ended. The man died. The questions remain.